The world before the gods, how the cosmos awakened. Let yourself settle here with me in the gentle, slow quiet of sleep, beginning where the turn of time slumps to the hush of forgotten winds and forgotten waters, where each sentence is a leaf that floats and each breath you draw will carry you out of waking thought into the slow heart of myth and memory where stories are not told, but unroll like clouds or tides or dreams that never had names. This is all the history of Greece, gods and myths told quietly and slowly through the still hours, so you can sleep while time creeps into the soft, dark corners of the creating of creation, where the world was not yet made, and the sky was not yet colored, and the gods themselves waited quietly like seeds, sleeping deep inside untouched ground. Now drift further with me into the quiet spaces of the ancient world, where time itself seemed shaped by breath and wind by bells, and grain by dawn's rise, and the stars fall, where the holy days were not moments to be remembered, but living presences felt in the bones, and intuited in the heart, where even the simplest acts of life were done under the light touch of something old and invisible, such as a hand resting lightly on the shoulder, such as a voice speaking softly from the edges of silence. Long before Zeus took hold of the thunder, or Poseidon stirred the seas prior to Apollo, as lighting or Hades claimed his dominion, before there existed form or face or name. Among any god, there was just the great deep emptiness vastness. Gaia, the earth herself, vast and long, patient and full of quiet strength, expansive and spreading out to form the space, where rest is to be found for all things to be a mother still dreaming, but not yet awake. Gaia came others just as expansive and strange Uranus, the sky who would eventually blanket himself over her like a shroud of stars, and Pontus the sea, whose voice would be quieter than that of the gods themselves, and Nyx, the night who would watch in the hours when even the Titans slumbered. These were not gods as we would come to define them, but forces and forms shaped like that which would be but not born as we are born, existing instead, like concepts made flesh, a gentle whirl of soil and air, a trembling of shadows and profound time, when body and heaven were not yet divided, and the future hung like fog on tranquil water, awaiting its initial ripple to break its stillness. Of movement, and slowly, with no rush and no sound, the first truths of the cosmos began to rise not as commands or laws, but as rhythms gentle as the breath, the rise and fall of presence and absence, light and dark, sea and land, sleep and waking. And from these patterns everything that came after arose, including the very gods, themselves slow and motionless, and heavy with weight that was of old. Great empty gaping space, a place without form, without sound, without fire, nor sea nor land, just sheer endless possibility, rolled in the slow dark folds, which they named chaos. Not a storm nor a fury, such as we conceive of the word now to shatter the stillness, but of nothing waiting for the first breath. Of the world as the dawn arises not in clamor, but in the first change of color, the soft rising out of shadow, and from this change sprang yet asleep with a darkness that does not frighten. Way rock waits for fingers to shape it, the way a name waits to be spoken, not rushed, not shoved, just waiting old and still and sacred, waiting for air. At the very beginning long, they remind us that out of chaos, something began to stir, not quickly, not brutally, but as the tide slowly recedes or the weight settles deep in the roots. And from the same mouth that had brought forth, the world at that time was not to be walked or constructed or breathed. It was not stone or stream or mountain, but a vision only just starting to assume its form. And yet, even then there was a balance, a soft leaning towards order, as if the chaos itself yearned for form, as if silence longed for song and stillness dreamed. Then allow your body to remain here, in this beginning prior to thunder, prior to war, prior to names carved into marble or recited in temples. Permit yourself to drift above the broad, slow bed of a world, And in that endless slow dream, the first things waited. They did not move. They did not speak, but they existed and waited the way earth waits for rain, the sieve. They bore many children to each other, and they were not small or quiet. They were strong and strange. Some with 100 arms able to make or destroy at a moment's notice, and others with 50 heads who saw the world in fragments. The Cyclopes were among them single-eyed giants, not yet the later monsters of myth, but ancient artisans, whose eyes could penetrate stone, and whose hammers would eventually shape thunder itself. And then there were the Titans, 12 giant beings, who were the embodiment of natural order and rhythm, time and sea and remembrance and shining light, and the steady weight of things that last. But Uranus the sky began to fear his children, not because they had threatened him with arms or rebellion, but because they filled the world with shape and sound and wanting. And so in terror, he did not cast them out, but pushed them down far into Gaia herself, into her belly, the earth becoming not only mother but prison. The weight of such sorrow increased too much, and Gaia, who bore everything quietly, began to move with something new, not love or care, but resistance, the grinding slow of stone. Beneath her skin, she made herself a knife of flint, not made of metal, but of will sharpness, and gave it to Cronus, her son, the youngest of the Titans, who was not strongest, but willing to wait for the right moment. Cronus lay in wait beneath the folds of heaven, and when Uranus again came near to stretch across the earth, his son reached out, and with one motion of silence severed the rule of the sky. The blood of Uranus flowed, and from it more animals were bred, not pure or sweet, but fierce, the Furies, the giants, and the ash tree nymphs, all spouting from savagery like mushrooms after a storm. Cronus reigned not over men, but over order and cycle and golden time, a reign in which things moved in cycles, and the world went round without hunger. But he himself was not exempt from fear, for it was spoken in his ears, as it had been spoken in Uranus, that one day his own offspring would rebel against him, and depose him as he had deposed his father. Thus Cronus swallowed every child of Rhea, born to him whole, not in wrath, but in quelling determination, still clutching time in himself, so nothing might change, but to the secret places of the earth, and there with Gaia. As assistance she gave birth to her 6th child in secret. Hestia, Demeter, Hera, Hades, and Poseidon all swallowed down into the black heat of their father's belly, and the world was still, as if breathing itself were stopped. But Rhea wept, and in weeping she did not go to the heavens. She wrapped a rock in swaddling clothes, and brought it to Cronus, who took it without inspecting it, and swallowed it, thinking the future had been wrapped up and sealed forever. The baby had been hidden in a cave on the island of Crete, where the noise of dripping water was louder than predicting, and the noise of goatskin. Blankets drowned the result, and when the time came, he returned not in battle, but by cunning. His name was Zeus, and he grew up not with Titans' power, but with shadow-born ingenuity. He heard thunder and learned its beat. And his brothers and sisters were freed one at a time, not as infants, but as full-grown gods, ready to take their place, nourished body and soul by the nymphs, and fed by the goat Amalthea, his cradle gently rocked by the Curetes, who banged their swords and shields to quiet him from the ears of the sky. Zeus did not rush his destiny. He grew up like a tree, learning first the wind, then moving out from under the canopy. He gave Cronus a draught that made the old god retch up all he had. Swallowed, they had a war waged not due to want, but necessity. The Olympians against the Titans, not due to greed, but to return the world to breath and balance and voice. They fought for 10 long years, rocking the mountains and bubbling the seas, until Gaia herself breathed unto Zeus that victory would not be theirs without the strength of the forgotten ones. And so he descended into Tartarus and freed the 100-handed ones, the Hecaton Shires and the Cyclopes, whom in gratitude they gave in thunder and lightning and the storm forge. Tales would echo in marble and temple, in poem and prophecy, and in the minds of those who dared to wonder, who shaped the stars. Beyond reach of justice, With these he defeated the Titans not to death, but to deep oblivion shut within the underworld, pits behind gates and walls and time itself. Cronus was overthrown, not by fire, but by silence, and the world was new again. A world in which the sky did not fear the earth, and in which gods walked like men. Zeus took the sea for his own and his brothers. Poseidon and Hades drew lots for the sea and underworld, and their sisters sat on thrones of grain and hearth and marriage. A new order began, not perfect, not peaceful, but introduced the Olympians to the midst of a world they would now speak and remember and cry and laugh. And above all, they would not be forgotten for there. But while Olympus rose in pillars and clouds, the shadows of elder things still hung, the fates weaving silently. Behind the thrones of the gods, the Furies cowering in the corners. And somewhere deep in the earth belly, Gaia still turned slowly, her heart still burdened with all her children. Her breath steady, her silence full. The gods might rule from above, but the origin of all stories still curled below them, muttering, not yet, not over, not ever. And in every temple, in every grove, in every prayer, murmured at dusk, there was left the murmur of chaos, the earliest silence waiting again to be sound. The world-is breath is still forming a slow exhalation from a mouth yet to be formed in the hush before time. Begins the universe unfolds like warm honey across a flat and barren plain. No voice has yet whispered the word light. No foot has yet stepped into earth. No eye has yet opened in wonder. And so in this emptiness without memory, the first trembling comes not with thunder, but with an almost palpable hum, a low vibration that drifts through the endless dark. This hum begins to thicken, to gather into itself, not sound, but intention, a silent pressure curling inward upon itself, like a seed implanting itself in nothing, and from this motion, from this gravitational pull, arises the oldest creature of all, not born, not created, not named in the way that we understand, but simply is in vast the primordial void called chaos. Not chaos in the way of disorder, as we might imagine, but a yawning space, an open mouth wide enough to contain the stirrings of all that would one day be. But companion to light, the refuge where light retires together, they curl around the edges of chaos, like a promise of cycles to come, of day and night, of waking and sleeping, of motion and rest. And from these presences, others begin to emerge without birth, without fanfare, each more subtle, each more complicated than the last, like a song adding harmony. With each breath, chaos does not stir like living organisms stir, but it opens a little at a time, like the edge of a dream meeting the world awake and out of its infinite folds. A presence of space and breadth, he does not fall, but comes to rest upon her gigantic and radiant, and she receives him, and in this silence she plots not in cruelty, but in restoration. She forges a sickle of impenetrable stone, and offers it to her youngest Titan son, Kronos, not as a weapon, but as an act of severance. And when Uranus' blood as it falls to the earth, new beings spring forth, not children, but results the Erinyes, the Furies. Allure her presence is not passive but tidal. She moves through the creating world, not with desire, but with invitation. Things begin to lean toward her, birds, flowers, songs. All begin to take shape because of her gaze, and so she walks through the world that is still reaching into itself, like the warm wind before a storm born of injustice, with eyes that never close, and wings that carry the scent of old sorrow, and the giants strange and tall, and the Malaya ash tree nymphs, whose presence is as quiet as falling leaves, and from the sea, where the rest of Uranus comes to rest, comes something mild or stranger, as the new world and the old prepare to battle, not for blood, not for territory, but for shape, for the very structure, their single unwavering eye. And when they ally themselves with Zeus, they bring not only force but sight. The Cyclopes hammer out thunderbolts from quietness' arms, they hum with the resonance of sky and time, and one by one the Titans begin to fall, not in death, but in imprisonment. Of being the Titans with their extent, and the gods with their purpose, face each other across the ridge of time, and the conflict that follows will rage. 10 years not measured in days, but in revolutions of the heavens and the ache of stone. A sea foam aglow, a shape next falls to her she opens, and Kronos rises and cuts the sky from the earth in one slow motion. Not bloody, not violent, but complete of their fall, the gods build a new home. A new height, a mountain, not of rock, but of existence Olympus, the navel of the world, not because it is high. Myths begin to unfold stories that are not answers, but explorations of hunger, of hope, of vengeance, of love, and in their laughter and in their rage. The world still turns, but because it is middle, and from it they begin not to rule, but to weave, but as recollections of chaos, as vows kept as testaments to a world still growing, still dreaming, not in love, but in necessity. Their embracing is not gentle, but inevitable. Sky and earth embracing without arms, and from this embracing comes life in its earliest and most ancient forms. He presides as rivers find their courses, as mountains rise from the back of the earth, and in time he finds a mate Rhea, who moves with rhythm and with grace, becoming what Uranus had become, a father devoured by his own children. And so when each child is born, he opens his mouth wide and swallows them whole, not in hate, but in fear. Rhea weeps each time. She holds an empty cradle in her arms, until at last she hides. One child Zeus wrapping him in cloth, and giving Kronos a rock instead, and the child is taken away to a cave to be raised in secret, with nature's fierce cries as his lullaby, and together they give rise to a new generation, children not titans, not yet gods, but something else more finite, more bound by feeling, by choice rises. Not as a warrior, but as a returning echo, he finds his father, and with a draught of magic and of memory, Kronos opens his belly, and the swallowed siblings come out blinking and whole, and together they start to move not as children, but as storm. Start to emerge new beings old, now only because they were the first to appear. Gaia, the earth forms not as a planet, not yet with rivers or mountains of full. What is to come? Time and order and rhythm. There is Okinos, the river that circles the world like a hoop of breath, and Hyperion, the light that will one day delineate the dawn, and Themis, the law that is not commanded, but felt known in the bones, like the fact of seasons or the ache of hunger in Kronos. Time itself with his grinding slowness and eyes that never sleep. So low it cannot be touched, a presence that bears the weight of gravity itself. He is not darkness, he is density, a sort of holy stillness below, huge and strong. And then the Cyclopes, one-eyed smiths, whose vision is narrow but deep, each child a piece of the world to be. But Uranus sees them not as gifts, but as threats, and begins to push them back into the body of the earth, a return not to nourish, but to imprisonment. And Gaia weeps without a sound her sorrow, seeping into the roots of mountains. One falls into its own nature, filling the great open silence with its presence. And then from the growing edge of chaos comes Nyx night. Her presence is velvet and boundless, not horrific, but enfolding. She is not the absence of light, but the place where dreams are made. She wraps herself around the forming world like a mantle, soft and slow, and entire the floor of the cosmos, and soon above them both shapes Eros, desire, not as passion or desire, but as the force that pulls things together, the yearning between stars and soil, between warmth and form, between what is and what might be, but as the idea of ground itself, a vast awareness of form and mass and stillness. She does not yet speak, but her presence is heavy and low, like the feeling of roots, developing in silence. And with Gaia comes Tartaros, not hell, not punishment, not fire, but depth pure and endless, a chasm, as these ancient presences unravel. They do not behave as mortals. There is no conversation, no conflict, no longing. Yet each with Nyx is Erebus' dark shadow, not evil. Gaia stirs not in movement, but in intent, and from her stillness she bears Uranus. The sky, not the blue dome of daytime, but the boundless ceiling of being. He is above her, leaning without weight. 12 children are born first. The Titans, not gods, not men, But forces old and huge, they are the framework Gaia continues to give birth to children. Gruesome to our eyes, but vital to the shape of the world, there are the hundred-handed one's creatures. The pain becomes pressure. The pressure becomes anger from Uranus. From this foam is born Aphrodite. Not yet love, not yet beauty, but the first blossoming of Kronos appropriates. The sky is his own, and does not rule from a throne, but from the wheel of time itself. But Kronos fears what he is. He fears in this cave. Zeus does not grow quickly, but deep he sucks on sacred goats. He plays with bees and storms cluster round him, like curious pets. And when he is powerful, the earth trembles not in fear, but in anticipation. And in the quiet moments of that war, other beings appear not to fight, but to witness the hecaton shires, the hundred-handed. The Cyclopes with Kronos is not chained, but bound by time, incarcerated in Tartaros. The deepest pit and the other titans are scattered, some to wander, some to sleep, and from the echo, the gods are not perfect. They are not distant. They are characterized by longing, by lack, by awe. They do not govern the world, they interact with it, dance with it, fall into it, and from their footsteps. And as night falls again over the primitive world, the stars sparkle, not as light. The ancient Thales still unfold themselves beneath a sky so vast and boundless, stretching far beyond hills that rise and fall as if in the slow panting of the earth herself, in still seas whose waves break softly against forgotten shores here. The first uncertain whisperings of the Olympian gods begin to take form. Kronos, the troubled father who held transient moments with trembling hands, afraid of the concealed future, the immortal. Gaia Mother Earth, whose boundless patience protected the source of all existence deep in the ground. And Oceanus, the boundless sea encircling the earth in a gradual comforting embrace that carried the mysteries of unseen depths to the eyes of men. Bored of the dying shadows of Titans, who long ago reigned over the earth, the heavens in the vast boundless ocean depths where chaos went unchecked and time had no measure but the slow breathing of the world as it spun and spun under the watchful gaze of silent stars. But deeply human in their feelings and flaws, their immortal lives weaving a dance of light and shadow, casting the rhythm of seasons, the turn of years, and the soft stories told beside the flight of candles on desolate dark nights, fate binding gods and mortals in endless grasp, a tapestry of silent wonder and unchanging fluidity, whose threads are still uttered softly by breezes passing over hills. And present intertwined like roots growing deep in the earth their Thales, carried gently in hearts, they are willing to pause, listen, and be carried, along on the quiet river of timeless myth and valleys of sacred lands. And life the troubled wind bears Artemis' footsteps, varying in uncultivated lands. Apollo's eternal light shades the long afternoons, and Athena as hidden wisdom glows in the moving leaves of fall. The sea as infinite hymn buzzes. Human and divine the stones worn by time report hushed petitions and forgotten rituals, the sacred groves, still perfume with light presence of gods who live between minutes. The windy breath of the fleeting air, the slow fall of dusk, the soft twinkle of stars before morning, Poseidon's power-shaping coastlines in stirring hidden depths. Hades' shadow rests in the quiet earth, where stories lie hidden, waiting to be stirred. And waymaking to a new pantheon of gods, whose lives were forever entwined with the fate of mortals, whose stories resonated as faint footsteps. Across ancient land, Zeus, the great sky father, whose lightning lay concealed behind his peaceful voice, standing at Olympus' summit, watching all quietly calling forth his brothers and sisters by the swift and untamed. Artemis with bow drawn and ready to shield the unentered places, the radiant Apollo who carried steady light in his hands, the soft hope of understanding and the gentle promise of futures, yet to become whispering softly across the ages like a boundless breeze. And the wise Athena, who sprang fully armed from her father's mind, carrying gifts of wisdom, strategies, and unobtrusive power. The mighty Titans controlled all that was great and ancient, their names called forth. like religious mantras that recall old memories buried in the earth, and heaven's bones. And Harvest and Hades ruled the silent depths of the underworld, where souls traveled past the light, all summoned together in harmony. Woven out of power mystery and quiet moments enfolding gods in the hearts of men and women across the ancient world, time's slow transition smoothed the mighty rule of the Titans, their strength waning like the fading colors of the evening. Poseidon, turbulent lord of the sea, agitated the waves with his mighty trident, creating shores and storms. Both Demeter nurtured the earth, tending the cycles of growth. These gods did not live far away from us, in locations inaccessible, but in the rustling leaves of sacred woods, in the soft lowing of waters slowly flowing through the earth, and the quiet, moving shadows cast by ancient stones, where time itself was slow, and the very breath of the gods could be felt touching the world gently unknown, but stirring the heart, stirring the imagination to the timeless dance of life and death, and all between. Their love, jealousy, wrestles with mercy, betrayal, and forgiveness became the ever-present heartbeat of a people who saw in these myths a reflection of their own hopes, fears, and struggles. The gods were not distant, flawless beings. As the old world retreated gradually, the new world rose out of mythic embers of memory. The halls of Olympus resounded with laughter and weeping, and the slow rhythm of in the quiet among the stars in the spaces where dreams drift softly like clouds. There is a quiet history, a soft breathing of worlds past. The ancient gods do not shout, but their voices continue in smallest moments. The touch of cool air, the glint of light upon water, the faint whisper of old melodies, but never forgotten, for they still exist in the eternal night under the stars. A soft lullaby song of old voices calling to us gently to recall, to dream, and to sleep. Beneath the vast sky, the gradual turning seasons carry traces of those early existences. The spring blooms vibrate, Demeter's still gift of rebirth. Across the rolling hills, the soft whisper of rivers recalls the tread of 1,000. The stories contain lessons veiled in ambiguity, such as soft cloth folds thrown across the shoulders of history. Lessons of balance between strength and mercy, of the gossamer strands that tie all living. Beings of the thin line between chaos and order that makes the world stable. These tales encourage quiet reflection, a deep breath, a slow turning inwards into the stillness where old truths wait to be unearthed. The canvas of men and gods stretches out into eternity, beyond the vision of eyes or the understanding of minds. Living tapestry embroidered of endless stories, each thread glowing softly with meaning, each bow trellised with secrets sung from mother to child, born lightly in the lullabies. Sung in the fireside warmth, the words whispered softly, as sleep rises like a soft tide through the kingdoms. Even now the old names breathe beneath the surface of the world in the silent spaces between heartbeats, in the turn of a page, in the fading light of evening, in the steady rhythm of the seasons calling out to those who listen, to remember the old ways, to honor the mysteries, and to know peace within the unnumbered unfolding story of all things. These deities once walked among mortals in the dance of myth and history, shaping fates and spinning futures. Their stories an endless river that flows across time, carrying with it the rise of Olympus and the enduring supremacy of the 12. But Olympus it breathes like the earth itself, its great halls opening, not by doors, but by silence, with golden paths that shine in morning mist, where gods tread lightly between thought and thunder, and the winds that sweep round its summits bear not clouds, but whispers the distant songs of oracles and the rumor of prayers rising from temple stones worn to silk by centuries of men's desires. Zeus' throne does not tower over in fear, but stands firm as a center, as a stillness around which everything moves. His presence, the eye of the storm and the peace after sentence. His wrathfulness not but inevitable, like rain on earth where earth parches for too long, and even his rage when it comes is conditioned by the need of return, by the quiet justice that even gods must abide by the hurt. And Hephaestus doesn't speak much, but when he does, an altering, but never finishing every myth. A cycle, every fall a start, every triumph balanced on the edge of another trial, the stars over their realm not distant. An action between lament and comfort. The gods do not speak to them in word, but in feeling, in wind and flame, in sorrow and praise, in the unexpected still of the world before anything is. Irretrievably altered suns, but indolent lookers each, one a burning eye carrying witness to all that has ever been conceived or done. The room shifts a bit under the weight of what is built, what is broken, and what still remains secret in the radiance of the hammer. Thus light of Zeus, the beauty sought in poetry and drama, murmuring with the sorrow of Aphrodite spun on looms. They cannot perceive their dreams entangled by immortal threads. Their children born under stars that glint with meaning even the most ordinary things. The lighting of a flame, the breaking of bread, the tilling of earth, are echoes of Olympus, fleshed out acts of worship, spoken in life more than in words, and all loves, all joys, all sorrows. A prayer tossed heavenward, whether known or not, in the fury of Ares and always. Athena observing through the thoughts behind the thoughts. Underneath him the court does not argue, but pulses with the weight of being each god radiating in their way. Aglow, not with light, and in the pool deep of Olympus. The face of humanity looks back in godlight, faulted, and shining, ever spreading, ever returning, always becoming something just beyond the horizon of knowledge, always circling the mountain, always singing the names, inscribed on sky, altars marked by not sacrifice alone, but hope and loss and awe. The holy groves is places where the skin of the world thaws thin, and the breath of Olympus may be felt caressing gently over the soul, like the wings of Hermes brushing in the twilight, but with sense. Artemis with a crescent of shadow cast across her brow, Apollo with dawn always reaching towards his fingertips, Athena as shield flashing with concept yet unspoken, and Poseidon stealing long, slow glances out into the distance, as though hearing something awakening deep beneath the waves. Both of them speak seldom, but when they do, the voice is a river, now put into words, the stream of purpose in the form of breath. Hestia listens silently, unmoving, a steady fire-drenching heat on the room, while Hermes blinks between thoughts. Half-spoken laughter, ever close to his presence. A dance between wisdom and mischief, between the road traveled and the untraveled one. Demeter has voiced the slow comeback of spring, her words verdant with promise and bereavement. Ares wets the edges of stillness with every glance and tone. Aphrodite brings the stillness before the initial kiss, before the plummeting, before time doesn't move in. Olympus as it does down there, because here, memory and future are like dawn and dusk, the stories that give the gods their definition repeating. And still the people below live by contact with these invisible presences. They do not see Olympus, but feel it in the stillness, before harvest in the trembling leaves, before tempest in the interlude between choice. The temples rise tall out of stone, not to hold them, but to hold remembrance, to shape space for the ache of something more that even the cities reverberate with divine echo in the rhythm of streets that mirror constellations in the hands of statuary, chiseling stone into faces that gaze not outward, but inward to something deeper, older, the laws asserted in forums resonating with the justice. Mortals dance with the gods not knowing their lives. In the grand festivals when the throng arrives and singing mounts to the twilights, the gods are closest not as spectators, but as presence as the flame between palms and the quiver of voices. Mounted to chant Dionysus though, not of the 12 dances through the orgy, his ghost radiant in laughter, in release in the unbecoming of the self and other of the now, and then the sacred confusion that reminds that living too must overflow. He moves across the threshold. Other men fear, intoxicated not with wine, but with the truth that smolders beneath masks, beneath reason, beneath the rational facade. And here, too, he is God, a reminder that the gods are not only control, but liberty. Not alone order, but liberty from order, the unlocking of the soul, so that something real may pour out in song, in tears in the silence. That follows joy. And so Olympus still unruffled, but ageless its summits reached not through rising, but through recollection through withdrawing, and rising together through following roads that begin in fantasy and end in legend, where the stories exist not in pages, but in bone and breath in the spaces, when life is abruptly more, and the world for a moment appears to glow with meaning. There are no endings here, but cycles the gods do not die, but return again and again, their presence shifting like the seasons, like uninvited. Thoughts the Olympians are not bound in the past, but carried forward by blood, by song, by the flame that still burns where the stories are heard, where the names are spoken, where a child hears a story and wonders if perhaps it might be so. The stars on Olympus move slowly, not to mark time, but to mark it gently, like Hera marks the shape of home, like Demeter marks the rhythm of the seed, like Hestia marks the center of the flame they burn, not the blind, but to illuminate the way, reminding everyone who looks up that the heavens are full, and not empty, full of voices, full of footsteps, full of the quiet dignity of gods, who move unseen through the living world. And so the 12 are always themselves, but never stationary, not fixed in marble, but moving like river water down the decades, each myth a ripple, each prayer a drop. And so it was in the shaking web of myth and time the gods of Olympus did not merely reign above. They walked upon the hills and the woods, all along the shores of distant isles, and through the dusty streets of cities, whose names long since were swallowed by the sea. They gazed into kings' hearts and spoke to shepherds' minds sometimes. Their voices were thunderclaps, and sometimes little more than a hush beneath the rustling grain. Mortals, for their part, did not merely worship the gods. They feared them, loved them, cursed them, tried to placate them with sacrifice, song and sculpture, temples carved by suffering hands over centuries, prayers mumbled into the emptiness before war or harvest. And all the while, a gossamer thread persisted. Mortals dreamed of the gods, and the gods, in their own immortal turn, dreamed of mortals too. Take, for instance, the tale of Semele, whose loveliness captured the eye of Zeus. She was neither queen nor noblewoman, but only a daughter refusing to let the earth bloom. The world dried up in winter and burst in spring when her daughter came back. This was how the ancient people explained the seasons, not as the turning of the earth, but as the grief of a mother deified. Among the stars, where he still roams the night sky, chased by her hounds of silver light of Thebes. Yet the king of gods descended unto her in disguise, cloaking his divinity in form, was not born from the womb, but from the foam of the sea. Where the severed flesh of Uranos fell foaming the waters into life, she burst. Wisdom legendary, she taught mortals how to build ships, how to weave cloth, how to read the sky for omens her city of. Athens testified to her benefactions, and there her statues glowed with oil lights, each night as offerings to her unyielding gaze free from his love, begged the earth to save her, and was transformed into a laurel. Tree her leaves still used to crown poets in his name, forth radiant and inescapable, and despite being wedded to the forge god Hephaestus, she hungered for passion, and found it in the arms of Ares, god of war, their tryst hidden behind drapes of fog. Hestia, the quiet goddess of the hearth, never left Olympus, whose flame burned in each home where meals were consumed and stories shared. She asked no temple, no conflict, only recollection and warmth. Hermes, the troublemaker, quick as air protector of travelers and thieves, both his sandals winged. His tongue silver, he traveled between worlds, conveying messages, secrets, and occasionally souls themselves to the underworld. And mystery, until Hephaestus entangled them in a golden net and shamed them before the gods. But even so, the force of love was greater than the hold of law. And out of their union were born children as wild and fierce as the flame. But in the remote valleys of Mount Nysa, amidst the nymphs and ivy, his laughter one day, ringing out upon the boards of Athens, his presence in every cup lifted for joy or forgetfulness, and cut their names in stone, wrote their epics in verse, presented honey and figs, and the first fruits of the harvest in anticipation. The gods might see, and sometimes they did, and sometimes they did not. But then he did not know. Yet the grief of a life lost and a new one started that she could safely behold. But the human mind is apt to be deceived by curiosity and jealousy. Hera, the jealous wife of Zeus, deceived Semele into demanding Zeus to show himself unto her in his full true form, and when he did so, the very radiance of lightning and divine presence killed her where she stood, leaving behind but only the unborn child in her womb. From that ash was born Dionysus, god of wine, madness, ecstasy, and theater, a god born of human and divine, raised not among the Olympians. Many gods had similar tales of pining, which extended the boundaries of immortality, and time tales in which gods wept as humans, wept, loved as fiercely, and lost as profoundly. There was Demeter, the goddess of grain, whose daughter Persephone had been taken by Hades to the underworld for half the year. Demeter mourned. And Artemis, swift and untamed protector of maidens and beasts, both who in bygone times cherished a man by the name of Orion. Unparalleled hunter, some say he was brother to her in warfare. Others say she cherished him till a joke of fortune, an arrow loosed too soon, ended his life, and thus she placed his shape. Love in Olympus was never straightforward. Aphrodite, the goddess of beauty herself. The gods warred, dined, plotted, and sported, but even they knew hierarchy and order. Zeus ruled by lightning, but consulted his brothers and sisters on council. Poseidon ruled the sea, but yielded to Hades, who kept the dead in their quiet cities below the 12. Olympians each wielded power not just over the elements, but over emotion and dream and the laws of nature. Themselves, they were not so much a family as a tempest of power, perpetually shifting, yet eternally stationary. Athena, the fighting goddess who was born from Zeus' head, came forth full panoplied, with no mother, her eyes sharp as spearheads her. To her half-brother Ares, though, was the insanity of war, all bone and blood and screaming steel, where Athena's as war was strategy and justice. His was flames and rage. He was less revered and more feared his temples, echoing with the screams of sacrifice and the scent of iron. Apollo, golden-haired twin sister to Artemis, god of music, god of prophecy, and god of the sun itself, with his lyre. He sang the world to light with his arrows. He struck disease, or cured it, his oracle at Delphi spoke in riddles that kings journeyed, mountains to hear, but even he was not beyond sorrow, for he fell in love often and lost often more, the nymph Daphne, desperate to be. Thus did the gods feel this pining. They would be unable to rid themselves of, since immortality doesn't stop a person from mourning it, only stretches it out over endless centuries, like the tired clashing of a bell heard continuously, but never repeated. Each god symbolized something vast, but also something inherently human. And then lame and scarred Hephaestus, the smith-master of flame, and forge his hands never ceasing to move, shaping gold into chains and bronze, into armor, his loneliness unstated, but poured into every flawless curve of his work. And thus on Olympus the 12 governed, not always in harmony, not always in peace, but in equilibrium, each flame igniting the others, each voice a reflection in the chorus of the ages. The mortals below looked up. But whether heard or unheard, silent or unseen, loved or feared, the gods remained ever in the background behind. The rain in the dance of fire, in the stillness before the storm, in the rustle of leaves where no wind blew. And their stories were told over and over again, until memory became myth, and myth the breath of the world. So it came to pass that the Kronos children occupied the lofty rock throne of Olympus, not in haste or ambition for rule, but as those summoned by a rhythm older than the world itself. Zeus seated in the center with storm cloud eyes and a voice that rumbled like distant thunder was not alone, because beside him stood Hera, radiant in her stillness, with a look that weighed each heart. And beside her sat Poseidon, monarch of the salt foam and the bellowing tides and the waving kelp forests, where no sunlight ever entered, where shipwrecks slumbered and whales sang in slow, floating orbits, and the hum of bees in her voice, as if the wheat and the orchard waited in expectation of her hand. Demeter came unnoticed, with the scent of growing things in her hair, the quiet of green fields in her step. Athena arrived like the silent thought prior to the word, with the forge, fire, purity, and olive tree, wisdom incised in stone, her radiant armor, although as yet no war called. Apollo arrived not in strides, but unfolding like the dawn itself with golden limbs. Outstretched over the sky, in the music of concealed lyres in every movement, a song waiting to be heard again. Artemis moved like a shadow made of starlight, her foot sweeping. Leaves not yet dropped, her fingers threaded with the quiet of the deep wood and the suspense of the hunt. Before dark of blood, before the wound, Ares was preceded by the scent of iron, not as a rage monster, but as the edge of will, the trembling in the hand, before the strike the taste, but of foam and longing, and the searing silence after the first touch, before words have a name. Hephaestus approached, bearing fire in his hands, walking slowly, as if the mass of mountains was wrapped in his bones, and all invention man ever imagined danced in his eyes. Aphrodite walked on air, like the sheen on still water, born neither of earth nor of sky. Hermes was last, his feet barely touching the surface of things, his laughter echoing between worlds, his fingers already weaving the handles of fate, as he carried stories like a shepherd carries stars. And so the 12 sat not merely to rule, but to balance the trembling world, to stretch their essence through seasons and elements and the hearts of mortals, who whispered their names in sleep. But their reach was never only theirs alone, for Aphrodite. Beauty fed the courage of Ares, and Hephaestus' anvil shaped the arrows of Artemis. They sat themselves not on thrones, but in currents and winds, in rivers and forests and hearths, in disputes and lullabies and fields. Freshly plowed and cups freshly poured, whispered in the ears of farmers and builders and mothers, rocking sleeping infants in the summer heat. And the mountain Olympus, once rock and root and moss, now bore the heartbeat of something more, something tempered of myth and time, and the yearning of those below. For the gods had not only overthrown the Titans, they had overthrown the silence before story and filled it with shape, and sound and trembling, and wind and dream and silence. And in the trembling hands of those who shaped their stories in marble and in clay, and their rule was not a throne or a commandment etched in stone, but a series of echoes that rippled out into the chambers of the world on rain and thunder and harvest. Each god had a domain. Apollo, breath healed the wounds of conflict, and Athena has insight. I see you, I feel you. I remembered the sound of your voice in the distance between heartbeats. It was the rise of Olympus, not a palace, but a rhythm, not a kingdom, but a movement that ran through each fig leaf and each fireside, melody and each promise made beneath a full moon. Mortals did not see the gods with their eyes, but felt them in the weight of a choice, and the taste of honey in the sudden stillness before the storm, when the world is holding its breath. They built temples not to house the gods, but to remember where the veil grew thin, and the sky sounded clearer, and their prayers were not requests, memories, and so too did the gods not communicate in words, but in wave. Each statue was not merely an image, but a doorway, each one extending an invitation of a gesture to say. The Olympians did not watch from afar. They lived in the turning of the seasons, in the spill of wine, in the ache of longing, and the joy of rest just for existing. Their rule was not measured in law or battle, but in the way mortals turned their faces to the dying light and wondered, and in that wondering the gods were fed. Even Zeus' storms were not punishments, but reminders of the great breath that held all things together, of the sky's voice when it could no longer be still. And in the silence that followed came, hear us gentle restoration, the cool cloth on the fevered brow, the soft order returning to the disturbed table. Poseidon's waves taught the shore limit and yield in the way. A fisherman listens to tides, and a sailor reads. The stars with hands still sore from ropes and salt Demeter. Grain fed not only the belly, but the memory of warmth of family of hands breaking, bred in silence of the comfort in known cycles, and the trust in return. Artemis guided the hunter not to pray, but to hear leaves whisper, and hearts beat, and paths fade, and reappear in moonlight. Apollo's songs stitched the rift between despair and beauty, made dawns, brighter even when nights were dark, and his arrows of light forced ways through confusion. Hephaestus created not only tools, but destinies, bringing into existence the houses, the vessels, the cups, the lyres, the locks and keys that would shape generations. Aphrodite breathed into lovers' hearts, but also into mirrors and empty rooms, and midnight thoughts reminding mortals they were worthy of adoration. Hermes traveled markets and graves through laughter and goodbyes, along the knife edge of risk and the thrill of the unknown and the ache of what cannot be spoken. Ares was not merely war. He was the resilience to oppose. He was the pulse prior to protection, the trembling prior to refuge, the heat of staying alive. And Athena shaped not only battle plans, but peace plans of gardens wisely planted, of truths spoken softly, of cities built with tomorrow in mind. These gods were not distant. They were woven into bone and breath, and dreamed they rose with the dawn, and lay down beside the fire at night listening. And Olympus wasn't over the world. It was within it, moving through branches and footsteps and songs and silent nods across tables. For the rule of the 12 was uncontrol, but presence, not remoteness, but nearness, not dictation, but involvement in the great unfolding. And so the gods did not remain as kings on thrones, but as friends and witnesses forever alongside the stories that we live, even when we do not speak their names. The mountain did not stir, but it rang out, and in the ringing came warmth, memory, hope, and the subtle pressure of something watching with wonder and kindness. And in the golden silence that followed the fall of the Titans, the world began to breathe in a newer rhythm, softer and slower, as if the mountains themselves were sighing after an age of strain and conflict, and out of that great and sacred stillness came the reign of the 12, the ones now named. Olympians enthroned, not by right of birth alone, but by destiny, by strength, by infinite layers of memory and myth intertangled like threads on a loom. High on the shining throne of Olympus, Zeus held the sky not in pride, but in a vigil woven into his very being, for he had seen what power unleashed could do, what ambition unchecked could devour. And though his thunder was feared, it was also the sound of order rolling through the sky, like a shepherd's voice, holding chaos ever at bay. At his side, Hera moved like a veil in invisible wind, and yet shaping all she moved past her eyes, deep with knowing and her silence. Thicker than song, she who bore loyalty like armor and revenge, like perfume, walking always between the fire of her lord and the chill of betrayal protecting. Marriage not with love, but with law and judgment, like a queen tallying stars. For him in crashes and tides, in salt and foam and silence. And when his rage awoke, the earth itself remembered the old shudders that still slept concealed beneath stone. In the sea, Poseidon walked like a dream, transforming in sleep, the waves rising and falling with the shiver of his trident and the beat of his heart. He had no need to speak much, for the sea spoke. And there was Demeter, her hands always on something that grew her heart, sown with sorrow, but fair his voice. Not harsh, but not kind, he was the sun, but the instant before sunrise, the instant when eyes shut against light and open to vision. His temples were not for worship alone, but for healing and harmony and hope. But by instinct, by the old blood heat that came before law, before justice, he walked, not only on battlefields, but in tempers and tension, in the clench of a fist and the set of a jaw. And though his name brought fear, it also brought the truth that strife was ever a part of the soul, that even peace. With hands that knew both pain and creation, his beauty wasn't in form, but in function, in how he kept. The world turning through craft and drudge and gleam was carved from war, but leapt out of the head of Zeus, fully formed, as if fate had no use for childhood. She walked through cities and council chambers, because they were gods, but they were also mirrors, their myths not so much tales, but truths carried in the blood, in the breath, in the turning of the seasons, in the rising of dreams and wrath, but in freedom. In the curve of a deer, the path of a moonbeam, the crack of a twig, her arrows flew without fury, only intent, and her devotees were those who listened more for wind than word, who understood that distance could also be devotion. Between words, he was there and not there as voice. The whisper of trade, the hum of thieves, the final whisper of dying men and newborn. Babies alike he moved between boundaries, not as an intruder, but as a guide. And he carried with him not just messages but meanings. Truths too quick to speak truths that glided between silence and sound. And somewhere deep beneath the earth old roots stirred, as if remembering, as if expecting the beginning of the next. Song in empires leaned not in defeat, but in desire. Her power was not in body, but in longing in the way. It wrapped itself around thought and dream in the way. It changed kings and beggars with the same careless gaze. Her love was not always kind, but it was always true to itself. Not as rule alone, but as rhythm is myth wrapped in silence and breath and wonder armor, clicking softly like ideas against each other. And her eyes were always forward, always into what could be and flowering. Because she had known the joy of life and the agony of loss, she moved through the fields not as a figure but as a force, her breath in the wheat, her tears in the spring. And when she withdrew, the world grew still and frozen and bare, like a house without a fire. Athena sprang up like thought itself, chill and piercing, and created for war and wisdom. She was not born. Apollo walked in light, but carried shadow with him. His music a bridge between the seen and the felt his arrows keen. Artemis remained in the forest, her footsteps unrecognized, not by her tread, but by the quiet that followed after she was untamed not. Ares was not reasoned, he was not created by thought. Aphrodite did not walk, she came like a wave that had always been there, like a feeling, remembered not found. She smiled. Hephaestus moved where others did in the noise of forge, in the shaping of flame. He spoke in hammer, strikes, and sparks. Each blow a sentence, each spark a story. He was hurled from Olympus, and yet he made Olympus possible. Hermes glimmered like a breath. Hestia was not the fire, but the hearth, the place where it sat. She asked no praise. She needed no temple, and yet she was there in every offering, every corner of every home, every family circle drawn. Her warmth was not fierce, but constant like the slow burn that holds the night away. She was peace not from weakness, but from refusing to use it loudly. And so Olympus was not a place, but a story being recounted over and over, a stage upon which the divine dramatized the discords and harmonies of humankind. The 12 were not single-minded, and their thrones, though mighty, were never still for even in eternity. There is motion, and the heart of Olympus beat, not as a single note, but in harmony, sometimes discordant, sometimes divine, but always alive, always echoing down into the world beneath. And the mortals beneath them gazed up not just in awe, but in reflection, for in the gods they saw not perfection, but power personified, not faultless. Rule but age-old story, repeating itself again and again, in lightning and laughter, in grief and refuge. Even during the time of the gods they changed, not in form, but in meaning, for each retelling renewed. Them each prayer retempered their cutting edge, each song rhymaged their legend, and thus they lived on, not as idols, but as shadows, moving just outside the fire, just behind the curtain. So the Olympus era was not one of silence, but of stories stored in the mouths of poets, and written on stone in temples, it's still warm, though abandoned, in names that last not because they must, but because they always do, like mountains' echoes, like footprints in the clouds. And the earth turned slowly beneath their gaze. The rivers still whispered, the winds still carried their names. And as the stars wheeled gently over Olympus as dreams, curled like mist from sleeping minds, the story of the 12 remained. Now the gods who dwelled on the summit of Olympus did not rule simply by brute force, nor by fear alone, but by intertwining their being with the world itself. They became presence and duration, and not merely power. The sky bore Zeus not merely above, within every tempest, within every peal of thunder that boomed through the valleys. And the mountains he was not a figure above the clouds, but an eternal heartbeat in the rhythm of the sky. Each bolt of lightning, a glimpse of his wrath, each rumble of thunder. Shadow, it was the quiet and unavoidable finale, to every commencement, the final embrace beneath the earth that no one could escape. He did not cry out or rant, but waited in silence, collecting the souls of mortals and taking them not into torment, but into the progression of their journey. He was relentless, not brutal, patient, not icy, the silent final voice at the end of every life story. Rain was not war alone, not wisdom alone, but the ideal blend of both, a symbol of reason in a world too often ruled by passion. Her name was etched into city stones. Her concepts lived on in law strategies, defenses, but the structure of time itself, the rhythm of days, and the consistency of seasons, his lyre plucked harmonies that comforted empires, and his oracles spoke in riddled truth that settled destinies. He was clarity. But to be the embodiment of fury unchained, he was the heartbeat in the cacophony of war, the messenger, a thief and a guide. He touched both heaven and the underworld, both mountaintop and marketplace, no boundary held. Him no temple could fully contain him, for he lived in motion and in the laughter that echoed after mischief, in the whispered trade between merchants, in the final prayer whispered. As the soul crossed into Hades' domain, he was not rooted, and that made him eternal for motion. Does not decay, it only transforms scream beneath armor. The red mist that fell across vision and mind, he was not. So much revered as feared, but always present, always required, for where the gods could not fully escape them, for, in doubting, they still uttered their names. The dominance of Olympus was not confined to temples. It extended to language, ritual, government, and the very framework of belief. It wasn't just 12 gods on a mountain. It was 12 infinite echoes that established the worldview of a whole civilization. And as the centuries went by, the gods endured, not because they demanded belief, but because their stories made sense, and sense, as all mortals know, is the one thing more durable than power. Daughter Persephone's fall, and rise they told all who worked field or garden, why the earth died or bloomed, why joy waxed and waned. Her sorrow was not just divine, but deeply human and in her cycles. The ancients felt a divine sympathy that knew pain and promised renewal. Was order there, would always break out conflict, and his shadow would lengthen. And mystery healer and harbinger, he stood at the crossroads of art and law, of prophecy and reason, and in his rays the cities of men found both vision and limit. His twin Artemis, by contrast, this conflict grew the mythos of Olympus, complex, layered, and long-lasting. They did not simply rule, they shaped how mortals perceived the divine, how they feared it, loved it, pleaded with it. These gods were not just beings aloof, but mirrors of humanity, as best and worst echoes of mortal desire, dressed in immortal action. And thus the dominance of Olympus was not a moment, but a state, an eternal becoming, an ascent, not marked by a single victory, but by the ongoing presence of these gods in every whisper of wind, every drop of ocean. Every flickering flame roamed far from the marble columns of towns and temples, preferring instead the whispering forest, the sacred glade, the place where the animal and divine still walked hand in hand. Her arrows were sharp, but so was her solitude. She represented a power inviolate by men, unmoved by cities. A reminder that divinity did not always wear crowns. His back bore wounds of rejection, but within those wounds was genius unmatched. He fashioned for the gods their weapons, their thrones, their dwellings in the clouds. His hammer struck not only with strength, but with suffering and determination. A god who labored, a god who bled for his art, who discovered beauty in fire and isolation. His flame never dwindled, not because it was never tried, but because it was endlessly fueled or carry scrolls. Sometimes it wore the silent hush of leaves, or the quiet before a hunt and buildings. She was not a goddess one called upon in crisis alone, but in every moment of rational thought, every reasoned argument, every plan written on papyrus or clay, she, to fleeting love or temporary lust. No, she was the goddess of union, of longing, of the suffering that drew mortals together and sometimes tore them apart. She ruled not only over the beds of lovers, but over the passions that burned inside solitary hearts. The beauty she aroused was not skin deep. It was the kind that empowered empires, that drove artists and drove kings. To madness, she did not demand sacrifice in the same manner as Ares or Zeus, but instead demanded devotion by the desire. She stirred a hunger that knew no land or name, was the goddess of the mind and action, the heart restrained by higher order, while his brothers ruled the living Hades, had ruled over the fact that all living must one day return to silence and memory, and in this he had held sovereignty over poets, thinkers, and monarchs. Alike for death was the great equalizer, the dark mirror that reflected all triumph and failure alike. The echo of his might, so too was Hera no longer constrained by myth or statue, but alive in every home. Marriage, every wedding vow spoken. Beside fires, every promise of faithfulness and oath. She was the breath held between two joined hands, the look exchanged between bride and groom. She ruled not by decree, but by her endless observation, her silent insistence on respect and order in all things familial and divine. And as for Poseidon, his presence was not merely felt in crashing waves or raging storms, but in the soft undulations of the sea at sunset, in the slow recession of the tide, at dawn in the rhythmic pulse of ships gently rocking in harbor. He was fury and calm, tempest and tranquility. His trident was not merely a weapon, but a staff that stirred the balance of oceans, that parted waters, that inundated shores, and shaped the memory of lands near and far fishermen. Prayed to him not in fear, but in desperate hope for mercy, for bounty, for passage. Hades stood apart, yes, but his reign was not born of neglect, or, and what of, Athena born fully formed from Zeus' head, with shining armor and sharp mind her Apollo. His brother was the light of civilization, not just the sun in the sky. Aphrodite, with her soft gaze and alluring smile, was not confined, an Ares god of war, blood-drenched. His role was never to make peace or to mete out justice. Hermes, ever-moving, ever-watching, danced between worlds, a trickster Demeter, arms full of wheat and sorrow within her, the rhythm of life and death, of famine and harvest. She gave to mortals the seasons and the myths that told their meaning her. Tears in winter, her smile in spring her, and Hephaestus bent over his forge. Smoke drifting off together, they became the 12, each unique, yet bound in divine tapestry. Their arguments were legendary, their alliances uneasy, yet from. Cities were built in their honor, not just in marble, but in mind. Philosophy arose from their stories, poetry from their passion, mathematics from their order, and rebellion from their contradictions, even those who began to doubt. Thus it was that the halls of Olympus ascended not alone among the clouds in the heavens above, but in the hearts of those who whispered prayers in the light of the fire or poured oil upon waters, still supposing that some way out of the veil of dawn and gauze of twilight, the gods stirred with marvel and old-fashioned charm, and as the seasons changed in slow beat, so too changed the stories of these immortals, and unfolded again, spoken by wind and by waves, and by wandering poets who carried their poems along stone paths and sun-kissed shores. In the gold chamber where Zeus sat upon his throne far above the world, he looked out over the motionless earth. Below, as if it were sleeping child to be guarded, and in stillness, he was not just king of cloud and thunder, but breath of law, the hand of balance. And though his justice was awful, was this order that kept the 12, contained every god with his sphere, every power shaping the world, not into chaos. And the cities murmured her name in stone and law, in silence before war and after peace. And she stood wherever justice arose from knowledge, wherever courage was guided, not by rage, but by intellect, wherever minds strayed to shape the world as a work of clarity, not chaos. The scent of laurel carried prayer, half spoken, half prayed, and even those who did not practicing worship him felt his presence in stillness after illness, in warmth at sunrise, and the belief that each day starts with a promise, and not in and but into dance as ancient as the stars themselves. Every movement, recalling the first light that rent the sky asunder, was misconceived. She possessed the oldest truth of all that desire, carves out destiny, that longing weaves the road of nations, and that love in every shape. And though he was not seen, he was everywhere, in every tool, every wall, every fire, kindled with use and heat and breath and whisper, the one who could walk between all things gods and mortals, dreams and death. And it was said that wherever something moved with purpose or with intelligence, his sandals had been there first, and that wherever messages met or travelers exchanged tales, he had been listening just out of sight. And so he was the unobtrusive God, the one who built the world not by word or fiat, but by sweat and passion. He was the renewal that came after tyranny, the ecstasy that burst forth when silence became too ear-splitting, and he warned mortals and gods alike. But in tale, in sky, in the flash of imagination, in the silence, before thunder, in the sparkle of dawn, on a quiet sea, and this was their eternal dominion, not by might, but by remembrance, not by throne, but by echo. And so their heritage traveled beside all who listened even faintly, even in slumber, that to lose oneself sometimes was not evil, but a sacred act of remembering that life was to be tasted and felt, and the slow beauty of something useful made from suffering. Of sea and every tale told, every breath spoken by moonlight or in temples, forgotten now and overgrown, was part of a living hymn, a song that never truly ends, but changes with each changing breath of time. With each indrawn whispered dream under the watch of stars is the soft strand that unites even the gods, even the rulers, from marble thrones and golden clouds from shadow. And his strength no longer resided in blind fury, but in the unnerving holiness of war, the understanding that through conflict something new could be brought into this world. And though feared, he was also held in awe, because war had not vanished, but evolved, and from this evolution he found a quieter glory, not of blood, but of transformation. Watchful eye and her touch was not only in the kill, but in the desire to protect, to preserve, to retain the untrained, and her command was not over man, but over the untainted spaces that required nothing of the world, but its mystery and balance in every shadow and dewdrop. Hera floated through the halls, like a warm summer breeze slow, and measured her eyes, knowing she knew her. Voice like rustling silk, and she was not strong in tempest or steel, but in marrying together the vows, the families, and even though her jealousy could move rivers and break crowns, she was also the echo of all marriage, the quiet presence at every hearth, and so her strength reached through the generations, not with the fire of war, but with the gentle heat of blood and inheritance. Poseidon, in his cavern dethroned, beneath the waves, still reverberated with tides and salt, but his temper was softened by centuries, and although sailors still spat up oblations in the foam for safe passage, they knew him as much as the great throb of the sea, the endless movement that rocked the cradle of life. And even when tempests were brewing sudden and riotous, they knew it not as cruelty, but as reminder that nature holds supremacy in water, never forgets its freedom. Athena stood upon the marble steps, a sentinel of thought, and order her gaze, never wavering her mind, ever spinning plots like yarn on a loom. Apollo walked the golden arc of the sky, not just as the sun, but as the beat behind music, the hand behind healing, the radiance of light that lit the fire of doubt. And in his temples, Artemis prowled the black forests with the quiet step of one destined for solitude, but never unaccompanied by the creatures of the wild, her only friend, the moon. Her Ares burned with the fire of constant fight, but now his yells were muffled like the air trapped in old helmets. Aphrodite drifted through the hearts of gods and mortals, her laughter hidden in petals, her voice in the lover's whisper. And although her domain Hephaestus remained in the burning forge beneath the hill, his hands bruised but trustworthy, his things as silent as prayers. Hermes blazed from place to place, his presence always transient, always swift, and still he was the god most similar wind. Dionysus laughed even among the untamed places where vines entwined and music overflowed his cup, filling his eyes aglow. And though the majority saw only madness in his wake, he was more than mere mayhem. And thus they stood not in stern majesty, but in ceaseless motion, gods of feeling and of remembrance, gods of light and silence, gods of order and of grace and of thunder. And even as empires rose and fell, although altars fell and scrolls were burned, the gods of Olympus stayed, not always in stone or temple. The whispering gods, a gentle pilgrimage through the myths and world of ancient Greece. Even today, when the wind blows across the tall grasses, when the sea boils and forgets its name, when the moon hangs low and bright over hills older than the story of them, it is not difficult to believe that somewhere out of reach the gods remain, whispering their legends in the ear of the dreaming, still waiting to be recalled in the still places between thunder and thought. For even when Olympus came high and bright, the shadows of ancient powers still rested, curled at the edges of light, for under every triumph there is a shadow of what has been lost, the buried titans, but not forgotten, the oldest shapes lingering still in caverns too. Deep and shadows, the rivers that remember the fingers of nymphs and the mouths of lovers. Drowned in longing, even the underworld thuds with story, not silence, but thrumming with purpose. Hades sits not as villain, but as guardian, as one who understands the burden of what is to be guarded, what is not to return. For fire, the river of memory also flows backward as well as forward, and in it we find the forms of Nyx, the night whose wings bear up sleep and dream. Heracles with hands that smashed and hearts that broke with shame, his toils not penalty, but pilgrimage, each trial a shard of soul regained. Theseus following the thread, not only through some labyrinth of stone, but through the convolutions of self. With blessing Demeter waits for her sorrow, not spent but moderated by return in every promise sworn beneath stars. Hera hears her pride, her sorrow stored behind eyes that see all and judge kindly, or not at all in story. Perseus with his mirror shield not in order to avoid the Gorgon, but in order to see her otherwise, to reflect instead of incinerate, and Hypnos, whose touch closes the eyelids of kings as softly as petals fall, and Moros, who weaves the fates not with cruelty, but with the workings of things. His labyrinth not in fury, but in hunger for meaning, for light, for a stop to circular motion. So many created by curse, by we see both the hurt of desiring and the ecstasy of surrendering, but memory of pain, transmuted into strength of repudiation, transmuted into power of solitude, transmuted into something divine terror by the touch of gods who forgot their own power. And yet in all the tales, too, is the promise of forgiveness, the suggestion that what was broken and still sing his name, not from fear, but reverence, aware that the deep is full of tales too long to be told tales. But purity, the rhythm of the world in distress, the cry of truth in times too, harsh for silence, and yet even he is not unyielding his rage, tempered by love for what he defends, by grief for what war takes away, by the secret understanding that even victory costs something only the waves know. Between stars and slumbering earth they survive in the questions that do and ask for answer, in the yearning that gives form to temples in the courage, now weathered by the hand of time, and olive trees still whispering in the rhythm of something old. The mortals who dwell under the gaze of the gods wake up to a world shaped not just by sun and earth. Came melodies that forged prophecy and healing poetry, and truth in every note was the hum of golden sunlight, the glow of dawn on sea. But in reverence fruit under statue songs to the air dances, duplicating the turning stars for the gods, were not remote forces. They were the breath within the breath, the dream within waking life, and it was Dionysus who reminded them madness and divinity wore the same face, the god of wine, of revelry, of separate, but part of a vast living design. Hermes, the messenger god with wings on his heels that raged like fire through the senses. Her love was not a gentle one. It was the foundation of creation and of destruction as well. With wrath and love and fate, Hector noble, and destined to the fall of his city. Odysseus cunning of things into the spaces between lightning, into the quiet before the harvest, into the trembling of an open hand. Raised in prayer, a mirror of his mood, and yet he himself loved and hoped and lost the sea. was not just his sword, his remembrances within his hand, and in his silence was peace, not fear. His name was not spoken lightly, not out of fear, but out of respect for the passage all would one. Day take, and in the dance of fire, in the goods buried with the dead, in the stone slabs that caught the sunlight his form, lingered like breath on frozen glass, smoothing it out, sowing seeds in the garden of imagination and belief for every story was a seed, and with every retelling it, we are never alone, and in the knowing there is peace and power and presence for the gods, who loved and feared and followed, and fell of the ones who spoke the words, and the ones who heard them of the world that was not made of stone, but of story and breath, and the gossamer thread that holds sky to sea, fire to shadow God the morning. It is the same song. It is always but a hymn for gods, and for us a lullaby, for a world perpetually becoming, perpetually remembering, perpetually reaching for something greater than sky, and greater than soul to mortal, and dream to dream. Do not die, they wait, they whisper and watch, they live, where belief is breath and story is soul. And in the voice that speaks these words, they return again to walk among us, as they always have, and always will grew altered, blossomed into something new for the gods. Were not unchanging, they shifted, they altered like light on water, reflecting what the people required, what they feared, what they desired. And the myths became cartographies, not of heaven, but of heart, mapping not the stars above, but the stars within the constellations of valor, of betrayal, of redemption and love. In the silence of time, still hearing, still remembering, still unfolding, but his home deep and unfathomable, full of things that had no name, and dreams that eluded nets like silver fish. He was god of sailors, of fishermen, of those who were bold one. They were the creators of wonder and the reflection of our own depth, and in their worshipping, the Greeks worshipped themselves, their fears, their hopes, their desire for meaning, for beauty, for home. And in worshipping them, they made a mythology that would outlast empires, not because it was perfect, but because it was real in its own imperfection. Enough to leave dry land and have faith in the bob of salt and current, and in every wave that crashed on the shore. His voice could be heard, not in words, but in power. And so the world was a weaving of the seen and the unseen, a dance of human breath and divine intent, a turning as constant as the turning moon, and accursed, wandering through years and islands, searching not just for home, but for the why behind the journey, each step echoing a choice by men and gods alike. Heracles, strong beyond measure, chastised and redeemed again and again his 12 labors, not trials, but mirrors reflecting the struggle within each heart to overcome the beast, to become something more, but purpose, the mind that had been tempered by challenge, the spirit that had been sharpened by debate, her wisdom, not given but gained by trial, by loss, by insight, and she lit the way by which civilization measured itself not in power but in reason, not in wealth but in justice, and so stood her temple not for herself, but for the idea that reason could rule the world, that thought could shape destiny. And in her shadow, philosophers spoke, artists carved, poets sang, and the city breathed like a living thought. She could build cities or fell kings, and yet in her presence there was ever the pull of something deeper, something older than mind, something like the ache in the heart when one sees the sun on the sea, and knows without reason that they are of it all. She was not kindness, she was not cruelty, she was truth, the truth of absence of form of the body, and the soul reaching ever for more. And cunning in his eyes, traversing worlds with emotions so fluid that silence was like a vow, he carried messages, but also souls guiding them over the threshold, between life and death, between one world and another. He was thief and guide, trickster and guardian, and in him the Greeks saw the thin line between chaos and harmony, between the wise and wicked, the moment undone. He came not with order, but with release. His cult was of thunder, not of war, but of ecstasy, of collapse into something more than thought, into frenzy. Into letting go in him, the vines thicken, and the night became a site of transformation, where masks drop and the soul is uncovered foam. He was Artemis's twin, she who moved like moonlight across the forest, her bow unwavering her eyes. Sharp as obsidian, she was the huntress, the protector of the wild, and those who walk its quiet paths. She needed no temple but the canopy above, no crown but the silver curve of night. But by memory and presence, by the belief that the divine was never far away, only folded into the world like shadow into light, and so every echo on the breeze, every flicker on the flame, every ripple across the quiet surface of water carries upon it a story, a presence, a name from those who once trod not above, but among the people with feet that cut rivers and voices that bent the path of empires, that outlives fear in the voice, that speaks it over and over until the hearer becomes the teller and the teller the tale. The divine world is not merely Olympus, not merely the golden halls, but the borders, the margins, the woods, where Artemis runs barefoot in silence, the caves where Pan pipes his laughter into roots. But daily there caress in the rhythm of day and night, of light and dark, and in each in-between moment when the light is tempered, and the soul is just a little more vital. Here in the half-dark, between human and divine, Orpheus sang not to escape death, but to shape it into song, to entice beauty from sorrow. And though he turned too soon, his music endures in every song that dares hope against the end. And Persephone walks shadow with seeds in her pocket, her footsteps burgeoning into the seasons, her silence full of life, waiting to flower again and again. Even the monsters speak not of terror, but of being the Gorgon, who turned not in hatred, but in desperation, to stone the Minotaur walking. And the heroes, too, are part of this ceaseless whirling dance, children of gods, children of men, striding the edge of glory and sorrow. And yet, for every name remembered, there are 100 forgotten warriors, lovers, poets, who detected divinity in dreams, in war, in still moments of courage, lives that brushed the mythic, unconsciously left only in tatters and half-spoken songs in stones worn smooth by hands raised to the sky. In every village where a hearth fire glows, there is a survivor of Hestia, her warmth not high but steady, the center round which families revolve in every harvest, drawn together, and the sea never rests. Poseidon continues to shift in its breath, in the tug of tides, in the rage of storms, in the silence. After lightning flashes, and salt lingers in the air, and mariners whisper. The sky also shifts with Apollo and Artemis, twin energies of reason and lust. The sun a chariot drawn by flames, the moon a bow strewn with shadows, their power close at hand. Even the tricksters have a place. Hermes, whose laughter weaves together truths and untruths, whose feet rest in heaven and the dust of roads. He walks with thieves, with merchants, with messengers who bear not just words, but choices and dreams and transformation. He is god of thresholds, of movement, of stories just beginning, and stories all but told. Aphrodite still sashays around the world, not as beauty and form, but as desire, becoming as longing, burning, and healing, and goading creation. Itself her love, not plain, not gentle, but wild, and tempesting the power that is capable of moving seas, and crying open hearts, and in beholding herself reflected. Hephaestus, whose flame smolders not in Olympus alone, but in each hand that shapes in each artist, who seeps into clay, into fire, into metal, into art, his limp and not weakness. Ares, whose wrath is not madness, and Dionysus, who tears the world apart, not with destruction, but with revelation, whose madness is not absence of reason, but presence of a deeper sanity, the kind that lives in dance, in wine, in music, in the fierce breaking of boundaries, and the quick unmasking of the self beneath all disguises. The gods aren't memories that can be remembered. They are forces to be felt. They wake in wind and time, in blood and shadow. They are not absent. They are not past. They are woven into the very fabric of the world, into the space between heartbeat and breath, into the still, before a name is said, into the form of dreams and the quiver of hope. Thus the myths do not survive as records, but as echoes, as flame passed from hand to hand, as breath in dark rooms, as wonder. And perhaps that is the greatest gift the gods gave, not thunder, nor gold, nor even fate, but story, the unending unfolding, the construction of meaning from chaos, the transmogrification of pain into verse, the ability to name, and in naming to sanctify something mortal, something human, something divine. And so the legend endures today in whispers and stormy skies, in the hands that build and tear and build. Again, in every child who listens in wonder, in every elder who remembers the stars are not up there, they are within us, and every name we speak is a light rekindled. The wind blows slow like an old tune. Across time in stone fields, across temples among them, stood Apollo, the light that sang itself into existence, a god of many things. But first, and always a god of clear seeing and of sound, he carried his lyre as one carries, breath not separate from him, but an extension of him. And from its strings the crowd offered to them not in fear, and thus the myths never stood still, but grew like shoots on the tree of time, each one embracing another, each god not Aphrodite, born of sea foam and sky blood, not so much gentleness, but rather strength, the power of desire of beauty. From her stock, and from the mixing of gods and men, were born the heroes, each with the weight of blood that smoldered with eternity and decay. Achilles, swift and cursed son of sea and flame seething, and the humans did not forget their names. They built stories like buildings. They carried them in their breathing, in their bones, in their cradles and laws, and the gods themselves did not go away. They seeped into the folds. They told of how Poseidon stirred earth and sea with his trident, not just in anger, but in time, how each tide was a beat on his fingertips, every storm. They remembered how Hades ruled in the darkness, not as cruel, but as keeper of endings, as ruler of lost and forgotten, and remembered an escort of spirits. Through shadows he was not cruel. He was immovable, a figure that did not waver, that did not judge. He held the world, and so the gods remained not just in myth, but in symbol, not just in temples, but in the place. Between us and those spaces where music moves without birth, where dreams speak in foreign tongues, where we feel the weight of an unmade decision. But in offered, it was Athena who stood at the city's center, offering not merely protection. And yet the myths persisted like water, down a mountain road scoring out the earth around them. This is the reason why, even today, when the wind catches the trees, just so, or moonlight, slides across a face in silence, we recall something stirs in the blood. Not memory, but knowing we are not alone. And this is the myth not of gods, but of us, of the humans. Do you hear it anymore, the song that croons from marble? Ruins and broken pillars that winds in the cicadas and clings to olive leaves that hesitates in the stillness before. And now you are part of it too, wrapped in the voice and the breath, in the myth itself, carried like a name. The dawn rises again over the lands of Arcadia and Attica, and the soft breath of morning moves like a whisper through the olive groves, as if carrying the remnants of divine memory. The mortals stir from their sleep, and somewhere in their dreams still linger visions of gods, walking the earth not as strangers, but as kin, with voices like thunder and gazes that could summon storms or silence them with a single glance. Yet it is not fear that binds the humans to the gods. It is awe, a sacred trembling in the soul, as the shepherd watches the dew rise from the grass and imagines Apollo standing beyond the hills, his lyre catching the sunlight like golden threads strung between the heavens and the soil. Across the hills and temples etched with time, the myths continue to grow not in silence, but in the telling, as each voice that speaks them becomes a vessel of the old. Truth, the story of Demeter, who mourned the loss of her daughter Persephone to the underworld, and whose sorrow cast winter over the land. Each petal that fell, each frost that came, was her lament. And when Persephone returned each spring, it was not merely the changing of a season, but the renewal of a sacred cycle, a promise whispered between mother and child, between life and death, between above and below. This was not allegory. It was breath, it was rhythm, it was the world. Deep beneath the surface of the earth, Where shadows bloom and silence is a living thing there, sat Hades the unseen king who ruled not with cruelty, but with stillness. The kind of authority that asked for no tribute and yet demanded reverence. His kingdom was one of memory of bones and endings, and yet it was not a place of despair, but of waiting of transformation. And so the dead did not cry out in agony. They rested wrapped in the folds of what once was held by the river Styx and ferried by the quiet hand of Charon, who asked for no more than a coin and offered in return a journey into eternity. And in the sky above all things, where light poured like honey from the sun, there stood Zeus not simply as a wielder of lightning, but as the echo of order, the one whose gaze kept the worlds from collapsing into chaos. His throne high upon Olympus was carved not just from cloud or marble, but from judgment and balance. His was not a power of unchecked wrath, but of deliberation. And though the Tales spoke of his tempests and desires, what lingered beneath those stories was the sense that even the king of gods was not free from the turning wheel of time, that his choices carried weight like mountains, and that his rule was a thread woven into the very fabric of the cosmos. Beside him sat Hera, his queen, not merely a figure of jealousy or vengeance, as the stories so often simplify, but a presence of quiet, strength of enduring dignity. She was the hearth of marriage and the protector of unions, the one who remembered the names of the forgotten, and who held the line when the heavens trembled with discord. In every ritual of betrothal, in every whispered vow there lingered. Her touch not loud but firm, like a wind that carries you forward. Even when you wish to stop, she was the spine of Olympus, and without her the divine order would sag under its own weight. And there in the forge of volcano and fire stood Hephaestus the god who lent the god, whose hands shaped the armor of heroes and the thrones of immortals. He was not beautiful, but his craft was he was not swift. But his hands moved with a purpose that echoed deeper than time in every tool, in every weapon, in every chain. And every crown there was a trace of his breath, a soot of his labor, and mortals in need of strength, not of the sword, but of will, turned their eyes to the smoke, and found in its rising, shaped the courage to create, to endure, to transform. And if Hephaestus was the fire, then Athena was the steel born not in silence, but in a cry from Zeus' head. She came not as a daughter, but as wisdom itself, carved in form. Clothed in strategy and reason, her steps were measured, her gaze, unwavering in every act of clarity, in every battle not fought with muscle, but with mind. There stood Athena, and so she became the goddess of cities, of justice, of the art of war that did not destroy but protected. She was not thunder, she was the space between it. She was not law, she was the understanding that made law necessary. And her temple stood in Athens not merely as stone and column, but as the body of memory and thought. And the myths unfolded further, not like pages, but like waves folding into one another, until each name became not just a god, but a symbol, a breath, a force within and beyond. And so the Greeks walked among temples, not as monuments to power, but as mirrors to the soul, for each god they honored revealed a part of themselves, and in doing so they remembered that to live was not just to breathe, but to feel, to worship was not just to bow, but to belong, and that somewhere in the wind between mountain and sea, the gods listened still. The gods were felt in the rustling leaves, the murmur of streams, the crackle of fires, and the hush of moonlight on cool stone, in the turning of seasons, the blooming of flowers, the fall of rain, and the rise of the sun. The gods were not distant rulers, but intimate forces woven into every breath, every heartbeat, every step the people took between earth and sky, between past and future. And though their tales were old, their voices never faded, carried on the lips of poets, whispered in the prayers of the faithful, sung in the choruses of festivals. Their stories became the very fabric of culture, the rhythms of daily life, the colors of hope and fear and love woven tight into the tapestry of human existence. The gods were not only in myth, but in memory, in the way the world moved, and in the way the heart remembered to dream. They were the breath that stirred the soul, the spark that ignited courage, the shadow that deepened mystery, the light that revealed truth, and in their eternal dance, the mortals found meaning a language. Without words, a presence without form, a song without sound that carried them, forward through time, through struggle, through joy, and through the quiet moments, when the world seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the next story to begin. The dawn rises again over the lands of Arcadia and Attica, and the soft breath of morning moves like a whisper through the olive groves, as if carrying the remnants of divine memory. The mortals stir from their sleep, and somewhere in their dreams still linger visions of gods, walking the earth not as strangers, but as kin with voices like thunder and gazes that could summon storms or silence them with a single glance. Yet it is not fear that binds the humans to the gods. It is awe, a sacred trembling in the soul, as the shepherd watches the dew rise from the grass and imagines Apollo standing beyond the hills, his lyre catching the sunlight like golden thread strung between the heavens and the soil. Across the hills and temples etched with time, the myths continue to grow not in silence, but in the telling, as each voice that speaks them becomes a vessel of the old. Truth, the story of Demeter, who mourned the loss of her daughter Persephone to the underworld, and whose sorrow cast winter over the land. Each petal that fell, each frost that came, was her lament. And when Persephone returned each spring, it was not merely the changing of a season, but the renewal of a sacred cycle, a promise whispered between mother and child, between life and death, between above and below. This was not allegory. It was breath, it was rhythm, it was the world. Deep beneath the surface of the earth, where shadows bloom and silence is a living thing there, sat Hades, the unseen king who ruled not with cruelty, but with stillness, the kind of authority that asked for no tribute and yet demanded reverence. His kingdom was one of memory of bones and endings, and yet it was not a place of despair, but of waiting of transformation. And so the dead did not cry out in agony. They rested wrapped in the folds of what once was held by the river Styx and ferried by the quiet hand of Charon, who asked for no more than a coin and offered in return a journey into eternity. And in the sky above all things, where light poured like honey from the sun, there stood Zeus not simply as a wielder of lightning, but as the echo of order, the one whose gaze kept the worlds from collapsing into chaos. His throne high upon Olympus was carved not just from cloud or marble, but from judgment and balance. His was not a power of unchecked wrath, but of deliberation. And though the Tales spoke of his tempests and desires, what lingered beneath those stories was the sense that even the king of gods was not free from the turning wheel of time, that his choices carried weight like mountains, and that his rule was a thread woven into the very fabric of the cosmos. And there in the forge of volcano and fire stood Hephaestus the god who lent the god, whose hands shaped the armor of heroes and the thrones of immortals. He was not beautiful, but his craft was he was not swift, but his hands moved with a purpose that echoed deeper than time in every tool, in every weapon, in every chain. And every crown there was a trace of his breath, a soot of his labor, and mortals in need of strength, not of the sword, but of will, turned their eyes to the smoke, and found in its rising, shaped the courage to create, to endure, to transform. And if Hephaestus was the fire, then Athena was the steel born not in silence, but in a cry from Zeus' head. She came not as a daughter, but as wisdom itself, carved in form. Clothed in strategy and reason, her steps were measured, her gaze unwavering in every act of clarity, in every battle, not fought with muscle, but with mind. There stood Athena. And so she became the goddess of cities, of justice, of the art of war that did not destroy but protected. She was not thunder. She was the space between it. She was not law. She was the understanding that made law necessary. And her temple stood in Athens not merely as stone and column, but as the body of memory and thought. And the myths unfolded further, not like pages, but like waves folding into one another, until each name became not just a god, but a symbol, a breath, a force within and beyond. And so the Greeks walked among temples, not as monuments to power, but as mirrors to the soul for each god they honored, revealed a part of themselves, and in doing. So they remembered that to live was not just to breathe, but to feel, to worship was not just to bow, but to belong. And that somewhere, in the wind between mountain and sea, the gods listened still. The gods were felt in the rustling leaves, the murmur of streams, the crackle of fires, and the hush of moonlight on cool stone, in the turning of seasons, the blooming of flowers, the fall of rain, and the rise of the sun. The gods were not distant rulers, but intimate forces woven into every breath, every heartbeat, every step the people took between earth and sky, between past and future. And though their tales were old, their voices never faded, carried on the lips of poets, whispered in the prayers of the faithful, sung in the choruses of festivals. Their stories became the very fabric of culture, the rhythms of daily life, the colors of hope and fear and love woven tight into the tapestry of human existence. The gods were not only in myth, but in memory, in the way the world moved, and in the way the heart remembered to dream. They were the breath that stirred the soul, the spark that ignited courage, the shadow that deepened mystery, the light that revealed truth, and in their eternal dance, the mortals found meaning, a language without words, a presence without form, a song without sound that carried them forward through time, through struggle, through joy, and through the quiet moments when the world seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the next story to begin. Beneath the open sky, the mortals lifted their hands, not always in prayer, but in wonder and sometimes in fear, for the gods were wild, and the divine could be both blessing and curse. Their laughter ringing like bells, their anger like storms, their love both a flame to warm and a fire to burn their stories. A map of human nature told in the language of stars and shadows of sun and sea. And in the gathering places where marble met earth and stone met sky, the people built temples and altars, not just to honor, but to remember, to reach out across the invisible threads that connected them to the divine. They carved statues that caught the light like living beings. They wove garlands that smelled of spring and sacrifice. They sang hymns that echoed in the chambers of heart and mind. The gods in turn moved through the world not as distant monarchs, but as presence in the wind that carried the scent of pine, the rain that soaked the fields, the fire that crackled in the hearth, their touch unseen but felt in the swell of emotion, the turn of fate, the pulse of life itself. They danced in the dreams of seers, whispered in the songs of bards, alive in the quiet spaces between one moment and the next. And so the cycle continued, stories born and reborn, myths told and retold each generation, adding its voice, its hope, its fear, weaving a tapestry that spanned centuries, a living chronicle that shaped not only what was believed, but what was lived for. In the stories of gods and mortals lay the heartbeat of a culture, the rhythm of existence itself. Even now, when the moon casts its pale glow over ancient ruins, when the wind stirs the olive branches, and the sea murmurs secrets to the shore, it is possible to hear the faint echo of those old stories, to feel the brush of wings, to glimpse the flicker of torchlight, to remember that somewhere beyond the veil, the gods still walk, and the myths still breathe, waiting for those who will listen and dream once more. The sun dipped low over the horizon, painting skies of Greece with hues of gold and crimson. The world seemed to hold its breath in fading light in moments. Between day and night, the veil between mortal and divine felt thinnest, a shimmering membrane through which stories whispered and gods leaned closer to listen. It was in this sacred twilight that lives of heroes and mortals, intertwined with eternal threads of myth, weaving tales rippling through time like soft lapping waves upon ancient shores. Among these tales, heroes stood as living bridges between worlds, men and women touched by breath of gods, their destinies etched not only in stars, but carved deeply into fabric of human hope and fear for mighty. Achilles, whose rage burned hotter than fiercest sun to clever. Odysseus, whose cunning mind sailed through storms, both earthly and otherworldly. These figures carried weight of divine favor and mortal frailty alike. They were reminders that even in imperfection, there was greatness, that courage was as vital as blood, and journey itself was as meaningful as destination. In quiet villages and bustling city-states, echoes of these epics filled the air, songs sung beside flickering hearths, whispers shared under olive trees, chants rising in grand theaters, where masks transformed actors into gods and mortals into legends. Stories of gods who loved and betrayed, who fought and forgave, who wove fate and unraveled it. Again, shaped very way people understood themselves and place in cosmos. Each myth was mirror, reflecting hopes, doubts, triumphs, and tragedies, dancing within every human heart. Where wine flowed and boundaries dissolved, sacred and profane mingled freely here. Masks worn by gods and men slipped away, revealing raw truths. Beneath reminder that divinity lived not only in order, but in chaos, not only in light, but in shadow, ecstatic cries, rhythmic drums. Swirling dances became prayers, declarations, and acts of release all at once. Yet these narratives were not static relics frozen in time. They flowed and shifted with each telling, bending to tongues and hands of poets. But close companions their passions and follies, reflecting those of humankind through myth and ritual. They found meaning and belonging connection to something greater. Pulsing beneath surface of daily life, temples became living centers of communion, where divine presence was not distant, but immediate heartbeat, felt in rhythm of drums, flicker of torches, hush of waiting breath. These places were thresholds, liminal spaces, where mortal and immortal met and mingled. And storytellers, breathing new life into ancient verses, gods themselves, seemed to pulse with renewed vitality in these moments. Their voices carried on winds there, and gods watching over their children below. Their steady gaze a silent promise that even in darkest night there was a light to guide and protect the myths. Whispered beneath those stars, told of beginnings and endings of love and loss, of wrath and mercy, and in them lived the eternal dance of existence, the cycle of birth, death, and rebirth that tied all living things to the cosmos. Philosophers and art, adorning temples and tombs in collective memory of people who knew that to forget gods was to lose part of self. Today their myths spaces of transformation, where doubt gave way to faith, where despair was lifted on wings of hope, where mortals glimpsed the infinite, and philosophers, it lives in the imagination of all who dare to dream beyond the seen and touch the eternal. It invites each of us to step into the sacred dance, to walk the paths of gods and heroes defined within ourselves. The spark of the divine and the courage to face the unknown. And wild herbs, the faint murmur of the sea reaching distant shores, and the quiet heartbeat of a world ready to rest yet alive. With the echoes of stories told since time began, and carried its spark back to their lives like a flame passed from hand to hand, continue to resonate, inviting each generation to listen closely to whispers, carried on wind, to dream once more of gods, walking among mortals, of heroes who dared, and of world alive with wonder and meaning. Forms glimpsed in flicker of candlelight, or sway of branches in night, this living tradition bound generations. Together sacred inheritance of wonder, but as a quiet warmth, a gentle assurance that the stories of old are alive, and breathing that the dance of fate and free will continues. Its endless rhythm unseen, but deeply felt in every leaf that rustles in the breeze, every ripple that dances on the surface of a hidden pool, every shadow that stretches beneath the gnarled branches of an old sacred oak, flows the same ancient power that once shaped mountains and seas and gave birth to gods, but lived breathed into existence by the countless lives that have come before, and those yet to come, the mythic and the real entwined, like roots beneath the surface nourishing all that grows above, but the power of thought, the clarity of insight, the courage born from understanding, and her temple stands as a beacon of hope and reason, amidst the ever-turning tides of history and wisdom, passed from parent to child, from city to city, from age to age. As seasons turned, festivals bloomed across landscape, like bursts of color, wild celebrations where mortals danced beneath watchful eyes of divine in riotous revelry of Dionysus rites, and where endings give way to new beginnings. His domain, a quiet mirror of the cycles that turn beyond mortal sight. A reminder that death is part of life, and that memory holds. The keys to eternity in mortals weave through your mind, soothing your thoughts, opening your heart to the vastness of history, the mystery of life, and the eternal dance of change and continuity. In cool shadows of sacred groves, priests and priestesses tended ancient rites, their voices low and steady, chanting invocations that reached beyond veil smoke of burning herbs, curled skyward, carrying hopes and sorrows of those who sought favor or forgiveness. Meanwhile, natural world around Greeks was itself alive with sacredness. Rustle of leaves was not mere sound, but whisper of nymphs, clear pools, and rivers. Reflected more than sky, they held gaze of water spirits. Mountains stood as silent sentinels. Peaks, meeting places of earth and heaven. To walk through these landscapes was a step into living myth, where every stone and stream carried story, every gust of wind message from beyond nature was tapestry woven with divine threads, world imbued with mystery and reverence. And so ancient Greeks lived in a world where divine was woven into fabric of existence. Life itself became sacred narrative dance between fate and free will, between mortal and eternal. They understood gods were not distant puppeteers. Even as centuries passed, empires rose and fell. Echoes of these stories never faded. They endured in pages of poets and in fear, and leaving only peace and quiet strength. Let your thoughts settle like dust on ancient stones, and your heart open to the boundless sky above. Beyond the walls of temples, beyond the lofty spires of marble and gold, lay the everyday lives of those who lived in shadows of these ancient stories. Farmers tending olives under blazing sun, women weaving cloth by firelight, children playing among ruins where once titans and gods were said to have walked here. The divine wove quietly through the fabric of existence, unnoticed, yet never absent the turning of seasons, the falling of rain, the growth of grain, all held within them the touch of unseen hands. And in this knowledge find rest, find comfort, and find the gentle joy of belonging to something vast and timeless, something eternal and true. In every village hearth, a prayer was offered. In every harvest, a song was sung. The gods not only lived in grand halls of Olympus, but in the soft murmur of a mother's lullaby, in the steadfast patience of a shepherd, in the laughter of friends, gathered to share bread and wine. These were the moments where mortal and divine met in fragile harmony, where faith was kept alive, not by grand gestures, but by countless small acts of remembrance and hope. And in the spaces where dreams take flight, and in this sacred knowing, may you find the grace to sleep, wrapped in the tender embrace of myth and memory. The stars that shimmered above were not cold, distant lights, but the eyes of the ancestors. Travelers and pilgrims journeyed long and far to sacred sites where the veil between worlds thinned, places where oracles spoke in riddles and dreams, where the ground itself was said to breathe with the power of the divine. These were. And as stories were told in market squares, under starlit skies, in the quiet corners of taverns, and in the hallowed halls of kings, the myths adapted, evolving with the people who cherished them, growing richer, more complex, reflecting the changing tides of history and culture. Yet at their core, they remained constant, a reminder of the mysteries that shaped the world, a call to embrace the unknown with courage and wonder. In every heart that heard these tales, the gods stirred, awakening longings and fears, hopes and doubts. The immortal and the mortal intertwined, weaving a tapestry of meaning that transcended time itself. This was the power of myth, the power to transform, to heal, to bind communities together, and to whisper across the ages that though the world changes, the essence of life remains a sacred story told in the language of stars and dreams. And so the legacy of ancient Greece endures, carried on the breath of storytellers, on the canvas of artists, in the music of poets. For in the quiet moments when day fades into night, when the wind sings softly through olive trees, when the sea laps gently upon ancient shores, the voice of myth calls out to those who listen, inviting them to remember to dream and to believe in a world where the mortal and the divine are forever entwined. The evening sky deepens slowly, folding the land beneath. A canopy of stars that shimmer like ancient whispers scattered across the velvet darkness. The air cools and softens, carrying with it the scent of olive trees. Beneath this vast dome where gods and mortals meet not as strangers, but as threads woven into the same endless tapestry, the presence of Zeus. Olympus lingers like a breath. Here in this sacred space, the heroes of myth awaken not with boastful cries, but with gentle strength, their legends carried on the wind like soft songs whispered beneath the moonlight. Achilles, whose fierce flame of courage still lights the hearts of those who stand against despair. Odysseus, the wily traveler, whose journeys through storm and silence remind us all that the path of return is one of wisdom as much as endurance. These figures walk alongside the living, their stories, not distant echoes, but living currents that shape the hopes and fears of men and women, whose lives are touched by the breath of the divine, the gods themselves not removed, but present their immortal passions and struggles, reflected in the joys and sorrows of those who walk beneath their watchful eyes. As the night deepens, rituals begin to unfold across the ancient lands. Soft voices rise in unison, weaving prayers into the fabric of the stars, chants that call upon the gods to hear the pleas of their people, to bless the harvest, to heal the wounded, to guide the lost. These ceremonies, carried out in temples and groves, where the flicker of torchlight casts dancing shadows that seem to bridge the gap between this world and the next. In these moments, the veil thins, the sacred and the mortal mingle, and the presence of the divine is felt not as thunder or fire. Mortals pause in these fleeting hours to listen to the silence between sounds, to feel the pulse of the earth beneath their feet, to find in the stillness a connection to something greater, to sense that within themselves every hill, every river, every ancient stone holds a memory of the divine, each telling a fragment of a larger story, a story not written. The wild celebrations of Dionysus echo across the night, with rhythms that stir the soul and shatter the bounds of the ordinary. Wine flows freely, laughter bursts forth, and in the swirl of dance and song, the barriers between self and other dissolve, leaving only the raw, vibrant essence of life. Itself a reminder that chaos and order dance hand in hand, that madness can reveal truth, and that release is a sacred act. Meanwhile, the quiet strength of Athena watches over the cities, her presence felt in the deliberations of courts, the strategies of leaders, the quiet resolve of those who seek justice and wisdom. She embodies not the clash of swords. Through shadowed forests, Artemis moves with grace, her footsteps light upon the earth. Her spirit fierce and free, she guards the wild places, the untamed, and the sacred, reminding all that freedom and balance are gifts to be honored, that the wild is not chaos, but a different kind of order, that life is sacred in all its forms. In the deep realms beneath the earth, Hades rules with calm dignity over the realm of shadows, a place not of despair, but of transformation, where souls find rest. The tapestry of Greek myth stretches endlessly its threads, shimmering with meaning, weaving patterns that shift and change with every telling, yet remain constant in their power, to inspire, to teach, to connect across time and space. These stories are living rivers, flowing through the hearts of all who listen, carried forward by song, by word, by the simple act of remembering. As you listen now in the gentle quiet of this moment, allow yourself to be carried on these currents of myth. Let the voices of God's heroes. Know that these stories are not relics locked in the past, but living flame burning brightly in the present, waiting to be touched by those who dare to dream, who seek to understand, and who honor the sacred connection that binds us all to the earth, to the sky, and to one another. So rest now beneath this endless sky, wrapped in the soft embrace of myth, carried on the breath of ancient gods and heroes. Feel the quiet power of stories whispered through the ages, the light of stars shining softly above and within you, and know that in this timeless place you are always home. And as night stretches further, unfolding its endless expanse, a soft chorus of the cosmos hums a lullaby older than the mountains and deeper than the seas. This song is the heartbeat of the universe, a rhythm that moves through the lives of mortals and immortals, alike drawing all into the gentle flow of being and becoming. The wind carries stories of old to the ears of those who listen with open hearts and minds, stories of love and loss of courage and sacrifice of laughter and tears, all woven into the fabric of existence, reminding us that life is a sacred journey, a dance with both shadow and light that every moment holds, the possibility of magic and meaning. Underneath the same stars that watched over the heroes of legend and the gods of Olympus, those who walk today find their place in the eternal story. Their lives a continuation of a dream dreamed long ago, a song sung before time itself began, and that will continue long after the last light fades into the endless night. So breathe deeply now. Let the calm wash over you like the soft tide retreating from the shore, carrying away worry. You are part of this story. You are a thread in the tapestry, a note in the great song. The gods watch still, their eyes shining like stars, their presence a soft glow, felt in the quiet moments between heartbeats. And so ends this chapter in the endless journey through the world of Greek. Myth, a world alive with wonder, alive with meaning, a world that invites you always to return, to listen, to dream, and to rest beneath the quiet majesty of the gods. Echoes of Olympus, the enduring spirit of Greek myth in the modern world. The morning light begins to rise slowly and softly casting its golden shimmer upon the ancient earth of a land that once held the dreams and prayers of 1,000 generations, whose footsteps shaped the very soil beneath. Olive trees and marble stones that have stood in patient silence for countless lifetimes and will likely stand through many more to come, as the world forgets and remembers and forgets again, and then finds itself remembering once more in the soft, quiet moments between dusk and dawn. The air is still, but not empty. It is full of things unseen, full of murmurs and memories and the breath of the past, moving quietly through the present, like smoke drifting through cedarwood forests, or like the hush of wind brushing over the stones of Delphi, the breath of gods and mortals alike, dancing in an eternal spiral of remembrance and renewal. There is something gentle in the stillness of this land, something ancient and familiar that reaches out, not with urgency, but with warmth, with a voice that speaks softly yet carries through thee. It again and again, as if the sun remembers what the world forgot centuries, that you begin to understand that myth is not merely story, not merely invention. It is a language of the soul, a way of remembering truths too deep for facts that still fly across centuries, and too wide for logic. It is not so much that the myths are alive, as it is that they never truly died. They simply changed their form, their shape, their rhythm. Bones with the weight of truth, hums beneath the breath of the breeze, it curls in the shadows of fig trees. It echoes through empty theaters where voices once rang out in glory and in grief. You may find yourself walking along a dusty trail high above the Aegean coast with the sea glittering far below, and the cicadas singing their eternal chorus in the warmth of the afternoon sun. And in such a place where time feels suspended, where past and present blur like fading brushstrokes on a painted urn, it becomes easier to believe that gods once walked here, not above us, not beyond us, but beside us, close enough to touch, close enough to love. That resurrect old symbols to speak new emotions in films that reimagine gods as cosmic warriors or broken heroes or whispering forces in the background. And what we feel, they held the fear of death and turned it into transformation. They held the joy of life and turned it into celebration. They did so with grace, with contradiction, with ferocity, with color, with power of fate and love and power. And still they remain the same in essence. Still they speak of longing, of sacrifice, of wisdom, of fall and rise. You pass a crumbled temple overgrown with wild thyme and violet flowers. The marble columns lie scattered like bones of titans worn smooth by time and rain. Yet still noble, still watchful, still sacred. And though the walls have long since fallen, the spirit of the place remains alive. It lingers in the scent of the herbs, in the dance of unseen bees in the way. Sunlight drapes itself across stone, as if blessing to ask why. Hermes still dances on the currents of commerce and messages in every transaction and text and whispered, secret passed from lips to ears. Across oceans and years, Hades still reminds us of what lies beneath, what waits beyond, what must be faced and never feared. And Artemis still guards the wild, the sacred, the hidden places of the soul that remain untouched by civilization. It is here in the folds of the hills, in the hush of the olive groves, and in the echo of wind moving through empty. They are held in the rhythm of the land, and the architecture of the mind, in the dreams of poets and artists, and seekers who continue to drink from the same spring that once nourished. Homer and Pindar, and Sappho, and Orpheus, and Aeschylus, and so many others who dared to turn the invisible into verse, who turned silence into sacred sound, and gave it wings or end for the ancient Greeks, did not think of love or desire as simple matters of affection or possession, but rather as cosmic forces, weaving threads of consequence through the lives of heroes. Kings and even the gods themselves, who walked as figures of thunder and gold through the soft folds of dreams and stories, long told beneath flickering lamps and beneath the stars that blink without end, but because love had been shaped like a maze around her with Zeus at the center, never still, never faithful, but always glowing with charm and storm. And as she watched the countless lovers and children born outside their sacred union, her heart like the sea swelled and withdrew in waves, and yet she remained unyielding, radiant, and present for eternity, divine light, or thunder or golden rain, who bore sons and daughters marked by greatness and tragedy alike, such as Danae, who felt the warmth of Zeus not in words or form, but in shimmering drops that fell through her prison, sealing like sunbeams, and gave birth to Perseus, the slayer of Medusa or Leda, who was approached not by a man, but by a swan white, and gliding across the lake, she had become a bridge between death and life, her heart divided between two homes, and yet full in both. And this balance echoes through every tale of longing, every whispered vow beneath olive trees, every glance cast beneath moonlight, whose touch would lead to Helen, the most beautiful woman to walk the earth, and whose very face would pull nations into war and ruin, all because a god had once longed for beauty, and the punishment of arrogance it shaped the stars, and it bled into mortal lives, like color into cloth staining history, with stories that shimmer and flicker still told in quiet tones around fires and beneath painted ceilings, where gods still look down with ageless eyes. The first time that the gods we imagined far above were often reflections of ourselves, seeking love, enduring heartache, and dreaming of someone who might stay even when everything else fades away into silence. Even now, in cities made of glass and steel, the echoes continue to sound. You see them in books that line library shelves and paintings, but echoes the kind that live within every heart that has ever waited for a letter or stood in silence as someone turned away. The kind that knows the bittersweet taste of a first kiss or the heavy warmth of a last touch. And so we linger a moment more beneath the olive trees of ancient Greece, the leaves whispering secrets carried by the wind, not written in scrolls or sung in odes, but felt deep in the soul like a truth too delicate to speak aloud. Athena still watches over learning and the pursuit of truth in every school and courtroom and quiet study where someone dares. Even if you do not call their names, even if you have never heard their stories, their presence remains in the way we dream, the way we fear the way. We hope their essence lives in the words we use, in the laws we create, in the art we cherish, in the myths we write about ourselves without even knowing we are echoing the myths of old. To be human is to mythologize, to see shapes in the stars and signs in the wind, to believe in meaning layered beneath the surface of things, to seek out gods in the storm and messages in the young. Flame to build stories around love and grief and courage and failure and in doing. So to build bridges between the seen and the unseen, between the moment and the memory. These myths offered not only explanations for the world, but companionship for the soul. They gave voice to the silence between what we know. So when we walk through Athens or Delphi or Eleusis, or a remote mountain village where children still play beside stone altars and elders, still chant to the moon and throw handfuls of grain to the earth, we are not merely tourists or strangers. We are pilgrims returning to the source of something older than language, something deeper than belief. A stone lion crumbles at the edge of an abandoned sanctuary, but it still watches with eyes that have seen empires rise and fall broken. Amphora lies half buried in dust, but it still holds the weight of a story. Every worn footpath is a memory carved in steps and sweat. Every breeze an invocation that carries words long lost to memory, but not to meaning. And in this way, the gods remain not as kings in the sky, but as mirrors of humanity elevated to the divine. They suffer, they rage, they hope, they weep, they teach, not through flawless perfection, but through the chaos of experience. They show us the dangers of pride, the cost of unchecked desire, the value of balance, the necessity of wisdom, and the power of transformation. And so you sit on a stone warmed by sunlight and softened by centuries. And you close your eyes, and you listen not with ears, but with your whole being. And you hear not silence, but a song that rises slowly from the earth, from the bones of the hills, from the breath of the sea. A song without beginning or end, without name or need, a song that is as much a memory as it is a presence. It does not demand, it does not insist, simply offers and waits. And in the stillness, something shifts within you. A door opens, a light returns, and something old within you remembers something ancient and essential and wild and soft and real. This is the gift of myth, not escape but return, not fantasy or revelation, not illusion but illumination. It is a mirror held to the soul, a torch passed from heart to hand to heart again. It is a way of seeing that pierces through time, that makes the ordinary sacred and the forgotten eternal. The myths remain not because they are old, but because they are true, not in the way of facts, but in the way of fire and song and sorrow and longing. And laughter they endure, because we endure, they live because we live, and because of that, they will never fade. Not as long as humans feel, as long as we ache and wonder and dream and break and begin again. So as the sun continues its climb, and the cicadas rise in chorus, and the olive branches sway in rhythm with the ancient sea, you rise and walk onward, and you know you are not alone, never truly. Alone, that behind every shadow, and within every dream, the gods still wait, patient as stone, soft as wind, eternal as breath. And so we continue forward, deeper into the long corridors of myth and memory, where the gentle winds carry tales of divine passion and heavenly rebellion, and the sky remains vast and ever watching like a faded tapestry, stitched with the moments of gods and mortals, intertwined without clear edge. In these sacred myths of old, we find not only battles and triumphs, but endless moments of longing, ache, and temptation with figures who held the world in their grasp, still unable to escape the stirring inside their immortal hearts. And perhaps no better example exists than the tale of Eros, the childlike yet eternal god of desire, whose arrows were not merely tools, but living spirits tipped with longing and bound with fate for once. His hand took aim, no being god or man could resist the flood of emotion that followed. And thus love was not seen as something gentle or always kind, but as something powerful, inevitable, and sometimes even cruel in its beauty and consequence. And if we wander now to the quiet edges of Mount Olympus, where ivy wraps around marble columns and the wind carries laughter and whispers, alike we might feel the lingering presence of those divine affairs and the tensions they created, for Hera, queen of gods, often found herself in bitter silence or slow anger, not because she lacked power. There are stories of mortal women touched by. And far beyond Olympus, on the fields where shepherds dream and nymphs dance beneath the wide open sky, there are tales of Pan, the wild god with goat legs and endless longing, who would chase echoes of love through forests and never quite catch what he sought. And there is the story of Daphne, who ran from the piercing eyes of Apollo until the earth itself heard her plea and turned. her into a tree still, and rooted while his hands could only hold bark and leaves that trembled like regret in the wind. For in the world of Greek myth love was never guaranteed, nor was it gentle. It was a force like fire or tide, able to warm or destroy, and even among the gods it often left sorrow where joy had bloomed. Just before, and yet still, it was chaste, it was sung about, and it was endured from mortals and immortals. Alike seemed to agree that to feel even a moment of true connection, even if it cost them, everything was worth the ache and the fall. And among these ancient feelings lies the tender story of Orpheus and Eurydice, the singer whose songs could bend rivers and hush death itself, who loved his wife with a heart so full he dared to descend into the dark underworld to pull her back from the edge of nothing, and though Hades gave permission on the condition that he never look back, Orpheus could not resist turning his eyes in fear and need, and in that instant he lost her once more, his song silenced by the cruel grace of fate. Yet his story lives as a reminder that love can move even the most unmovable forces for a moment, and that such power is both a blessing and a burden carried in silence. Now we move gently into the shadowed realm of Hades himself, not as ruler of evil, but as a keeper of balance and silence whose love for Persephone was not taken with rage, but with hunger for companionship in a realm where little else bloomed. And when she returned each spring, the world turned green with her arrival for. And so, in this long breath of myth, we come to understand that love among the us Greek gods was not mere ornament to their grandeur, but the very thread that often unraveled their power. It was the root of wars, the cause of peace, the muse of poetry. And in this dreamlike drift through divine longing and forgotten passion, we find not answers. And as the stars shift above and the fire dims, we close our eyes and breathe in this tender storm of emotion, understanding, perhaps for. And so time moved gently across the fields of stone and shadow where myths once lived not as distant tales, but as breath and bone, as heartbeat and silence, and where the gods had once walked in sandals of thunder and robes, woven from wind and sea foam, now their memories wandered softly through the groves and gardens and mountain paths, lingering in petals and ash, and in the quiet spaces between one thought and the next. In the hush of twilight, when the sky turns to a soft glowing tapestry of purple and gold, the old stories come alive, not in grand gestures, but in the subtle way. A breeze stirs the leaves of the olive tree, or in the tilt of a statue that catches the light in a way that makes the heart pause for just a moment, a single heartbeat of eternity, stretching like the thread of Ariadne, across a labyrinth of time, where each corner holds the whisper of a name, once sacred, once feared, once worshipped. There were young boys who ran through dusty courtyards chasing each other, with laughter that echoed like Hermes in flight, swift and untamed, while old women sat near the fountains, weaving tales into their baskets as they told of Hera, jealous watch, and Apollo, tragic songs. And in their stories, there was both warning and wonder, a deep sense that these myths were not dead, but sleeping perhaps, dreaming beneath the stones, waiting for a voice to call them once more. Along the cliffs where the waves broke like the drums of Poseidon, wrath fishermen cast their nets and murmured prayers, not because they believed in divine punishment, but because the sea has always asked for respect and reverence, and in their quiet tones and steady hands was the echo of ancient rites passed from father to son, from storm to calm, from salt to flesh. And so the rituals endured even as their names faded like footprints in sand. And in the sacred groves where Artemis once ran wild through moonlight and pine, her presence could still be felt in the soft hush of dusk, in the cry of a hawk, in the stillness that falls just before night wraps the world in its velvet shawl. And those who wandered there alone sometimes felt eyes upon them, not cruel, not kind, simply ancient and watching like time itself, held breathless in that one eternal moment between memory and myth. In the marketplaces of cities long lost to war and time, where statues once stood tall and proud, now only fragments remain, broken torsos and headless deities. worn smooth by wind and rain, and yet still they draw the eye still. They stir something in the soul, a kind of longing for something greater, something noble, or terrible, or divine. And though we cannot name it, we feel its shape in the curve of marble, in the echo of voices that once praised and feared in equal measure. There were temples carved into mountains, where acolytes once lit sacred fires and watched as shadows danced along the walls, whispering secrets in flickering shapes. And though now only ruins remain, though ivy and moss have claimed the altars, the stones remember, and those who sit among them in silence sometimes hear the faint rustle of robes, the chant of a forgotten hymn, the low hum of power that never truly left, but only shifted, changed, folded itself into the bones of the earth. And in the hearts of poets and dreamers, the myths have taken root, blooming in verse and vision, in painting and song. And in the quiet hours of the night, when sleep does not come, when the mind drifts across the threshold between real and imagined, it is often these ancient stories that come unbidden, like ships across the dark sea, bearing cargo of sorrow and joy, of beauty and terror, wrapped in the golden thread of remembrance. Palm and wonder if the fates have already spun her thread, if her choices are her own, or echoes of something far older than herself. And in that wonder the gods are reborn, not as rulers, but as questions, as mirrors, as possibilities. A boy may lie awake staring at the ceiling and wonder if he too could fly, if wings would carry him above the fields and fears, and into the sky like Icarus, though he would aim not for the sun, but for the stars, and a girl might trace the lines of her. But as symbols, as guides, as the raw clay from which meaning could be shaped and reshaped with every generation, like Prometheus crafting mankind not once, but again and again in every age of fire and darkness and dawn. The philosophers of old pondered these things with words like fire and ink like water. They debated the nature of love and war, of justice and chaos, and always in the shadows of their thoughts stood the myths, not as distractions, but as presence, as weight, as feeling. And when a traveler stands alone among the broken columns, feeling the sun on their skin and the silence in their bones, they may find themselves weeping not from sadness, but from the unbearable beauty of remembering something they never lived, of touching something eternal with mortal hands. And the myths themselves have changed like rivers, carving new paths through old stone, adapting to the voices that carry them, reshaping themselves to fit the needs of the moment, sometimes feared, sometimes worshipped, sometimes mocked, but never entirely forgotten. For as long as there are questions, there will be myths, and as long as there are myths, there will be stories, and as long as there are stories, there will be gods walking not upon Olympus, but within us in our fears, our dreams, our desires. There were once songs sung at funerals that spoke of Hades and Persephone, of the journey through the underworld, and the blooming of spring from death. And even now, in distant lands, people plant flowers on graves and whisper to the departed. And though the names have changed, the ritual remains. And in that act is the heartbeat of myth, the belief that love and loss are intertwined. Like ivy on stone, like day on night, like echo on voice. The winds that move through the ruins of temples carry with them more than dust. They carry memory, not as fact. And so it is that the gods live on, not in the heavens, but in the soil, in the breath, in the stories told in classrooms, in cafes, in songs, hummed under the breath in paintings, hung in museums, and scrawled in notebooks and dreams, that shimmer just out of reach, and in the quiet moments when the world slows and the heart listens. Closely they come again, not with thunder, but with stillness, not with fire, but with longing. The streets grow quiet now, the echoes of sandals on stone growing ever fainter as the heart of the city slows to a hush. Still murmur in low voices, sipping from cups held by fingers adorned with rings of serpents and lions, symbols of wealth, power, and stories deeper than the veins of marble beneath their feet. And while the streets sleep, the politics do not, for there is no true rest in the minds of those who govern and whisper, for in every corner there is ambition cloaked in modesty, wrapped in tradition, and sealed with a smile, meant to disarm and deceive. And though the doors are closed, now the air remains alive with memory, every drop holding stories that cannot be washed away, no matter how many buckets are poured, or how many seasons past the lamps flicker in the windows, casting long soft glows onto the crumbling walls, while the flicker of torchlight carries the scent of oil and smoke. Portrayed for the stories have paused, but not ended. They wait patient as stone for the breath of a voice to awaken them once again. And something older, still something buried in the layers of dust and time, keep their watch over flocks that seem unchanged since the days of old. They speak little only when needed, and let the wind carry their thoughts for them, seeing their hands raised in blessings, or warning, or stillness, that only the truly faithful understand. A priest moves slowly through the chamber, robes brushing stone like waves against a forgotten shore. He lights a final offering, his voice low, and move, and sing their songs to anyone willing to hear tales of gods who loved and fought and sacrificed, tales of heroes who dared and stumbled and rose again, tales of ordinary people whose lives were touched by wonder, and whose hopes were as vast as the endless sky above once more. And in this pause, the city belongs to no one and to everyone at once, to the gods, to the ghosts, to the dreams, still echoing in the silence. It is a moment stolen from time, suspended between memory and forgetting, where the past falls gently into the present, and the heartbeat of the ancient world whispers once more beneath the stars. Of time, so too, your soul rests in the embrace of stories told and waiting to be told. Again, in the endless dance of life and legend, and cracked with age, calling upon names that were already ancient, when his grandfather was still a boy. And as he prays, he does not ask for favor. He asks for understanding and silence between the hills and the trees and the stars. They trust in old stories older than the stones of the temples, stories of creatures that passed through mist and time, of gods who test the humble, and of men who became legends not because they sought glory, but because they endured the long cold and returned. The myth of Orpheus and Eurydice plays again in every goodbye whispered at train stations, in every hand that reaches back only to find emptiness. And the myth of Narcissus lives in every selfie, in every mirror stared into too long in search of something we cannot name. And the myth of Athena watches over every strategist, every artist, every seeker of wisdom, who lifts their head to the sky and asks, why not what, if who am I? And the gods smile not with judgment, but with understanding, for they too were born of questions and fire of need, and fear of awe, and loneliness, and love. And they do not ask for temples or offerings. They ask only to be remembered, to be spoken aloud, to be carried in the stories we tell to our children, and in the silences we hold with ourselves in the night. There are ruins still waiting to be uncovered, scrolls, yet unread, songs, yet unsung, and in all of them, the myths wait not as past, but as potential. For every time we tell the story anew, we give it breath, we give it life. We become not just listeners, but co-creators, shaping the divine in our image, even as it shapes us in return. And now, as this long winding journey of memory and myth begins to draw near its end, the sky above still holds the soft gold of fading day, and the sea still murmurs to the shore, and somewhere in a forgotten valley a shepherd hums, a tune passed down without words, without names, yet full of meaning. And in that tune the old gods smile, for though their altars may have crumbled, their essence remains carried in psalm, in shadow, in story. So let the myths live not as relics, but as companions. Let them walk beside us unseen, yet deeply felt. Let them guide us not as masters, but as reminders that we are not the first to feel wonder or pain, to seek love or justice, to question or believe. We are simply the latest voice in an eternal chorus, and our song too will echo through the ages, carried on wind and water and memory. And so the twilight of our journey into this ancient realm begins to settle gently, like a velvet curtain, lowered slowly over the stage of forgotten time, where shadows dance and whispers of lives once lived drift quietly upon the breeze. In the highest rooms where silks fall like water, and servants tread gently without voice or name the elite of the empire. Below, in the poorer quarters, a child stirs in her sleep, turning toward the warmth of her mother and the dying fire. Her dreams are filled not with gods or emperors, but with bread with figs, with sandals that fit, and maybe one day a home with 2 rooms and a roof that does not cry when the sky opens above her. And even in her dreams, there is the hush of prayers passed through generations, unspoken like breath between breaths, and in her tiny hand, curled tight around nothing lies, the hope of a city that rarely sees her, but still depends on her. And far beyond the gates in the open fields, where the night is darker than any alley in the city, the shepherds, within the temples quieted now. By the falling night, the statues loom like silent judges frozen in perfect beauty, their eyes blind, yet all. Across the city, the bathhouses cool the heated, marble sighing under the absence of bodies once wrapped in laughter and gossip and heat. The waters still carry the scent of oil, and the faint memory of perfume and secret conversations lost in steam and shadows. The walls remember what the mouths have long forgotten. And in the amphitheaters, where the cheers have faded, and the dust settles like a soft burial cloth, the empty seats hold the weight of generations of eyes, watching of hands, clapping of lives changing for a moment in the face of myth and story. The wooden masks rest now upon their shelves, their grins and scowls stilled their power, sleeping like the gods they once. In the darkest corners of the city, where the lights never quite reach, there are still figures moving, traders of secrets, smugglers of forgotten things, those who walk where law ends in stories. Begin they speak in half-truths, in gestures, in glances that carry weight and risk. They hold in their hands the bones of knowledge, and in their eyes flicker reflections of fires long extinguished. They know the hidden places, the buried doors, and the maps, made not of ink and parchment, but of scars and silence. Even now, deep below the ground, beneath the layers of brick and ash and soil, the bones of the past remain untouched and undisturbed, curled as if still dreaming of the world above, coins still clutched in palms, teeth worn by bread and wine and laughter. Their presence is a quiet song sung only to those who choose to listen, and to listen is to remember, and to remember is to feel the weight of 1,000 hearts, beating once in time with yours. This final hush of the night is not an end, but a breath held a moment before the dawn, before the fires are lit again, before the streets hum with life. Here the line between the mortal and the divine blurs, the breath of history mingles with the pulse of living souls and the sacred stories. Pulse in rhythm with the beating heart of the earth, a rhythm as old as time itself, and yet new with each rising sun, a rhythm that calls the dreamer, the seeker, the wanderer to listen and remember, and to become part of a story that never ends. In these quiet moments under the canopy of stars, when the world seems still, the stories breathe. So as you close your eyes and let the night enfold, you know that you too are part of this great tapestry, woven from light and shadow, from love and loss, from myth and memory. And that just as the city sleeps wrapped in the silence, the city awakens slowly beneath a pale sky, where the first light spills softly across rooftops' terracotta tiles. Glowing faintly like embers caught in the quiet dawn, the air is cool but holds the promise of heat soon to come as the sun climbs higher and the world stirs from its nightly reverie. Shadows retreat as gentle fingers of gold stretch across stone walls, touching weathered facades, and delicate carvings that tell stories older than memory windows catch the light like watchful eyes opening to greet a new day, a soft murmur of life beginning to rise in harmony with the warming air. Streets that were hushed and empty just hours before now begin to fill with the sounds of life, footsteps echoing on stone merchants' opening shutters, their voices rising in familiar calls, and the scent of fresh bread drifting from ovens, mingling with the sweet sharp fragrance of figs and wild herbs. From market stalls where hands reach eagerly for the season's gifts, the chatter of neighbors weaving through narrow alleys mingles with the occasional clatter of carts and the soft rustling of fabric from stalls. draped with cloth dyed in rich colors hues that speak of distant lands and ancient dyes, the marketplace. A tapestry of scents, sights, and sounds alive with the pulse of human connection. In the narrow alleys, children run with laughter, weaving between elders who pause to greet neighbors with nods and gentle smiles. The rhythms of daily life unfolding like a slow dance passed down through generations. A dance choreographed by the cycles of nature, the rise and fall of tides, the turning of seasons, and the steady beat of human hearts, and heroes of battles, and peace of love and loss, whispered through generations, and held in the silent language of stone. Their small feet patter against worn stones, worn smooth by centuries of footsteps, each step a silent echo of those who came before their laughter, rising like music carried on the breeze, mingling with the songs of birds perched in ancient olive trees whose gnarled branches have witnessed countless dawns and strength, the ancient rhythms echoing not only in temples but in the very breath of the city itself, but the hopes of the people who come to offer prayers and thanks offerings, placed carefully on altars, tokens of gratitude for harvest safe travels or healing hands, singing songs of courage and longing songs that tell of storms, weathered and of distant shores seen through eyes bright with hope and tempered by hardship. The carved reliefs seem to glow softly, as if breathing with a life all their own, their intricate patterns telling tales of gods. The priests and priestesses move with quiet purpose. Their gestures deliberate, their voices soft, as they carry out rites old as the stones beneath. Their feet rites that connect the mortal to the divine, weaving invisible threads of connection and faith that bind community and cosmos in a delicate balance. Their hands tracing symbols in the air, the scent of incense rising in slow spirals. Their eyes reflecting a calm that anchors the restless souls who come seeking solace and hope. Here the power of words is felt like the pulse of a drum, guiding the rhythm of lives intertwined across time and space. Near the harbor, fishermen cast nets into waters that gleam like molten silver, the sea whispering ancient secrets as it laps. Against the wooden hulls, boats bob gently in rhythm with the pulse of the tides. Their cruise in peace, even as the world spins ever faster around the edges of this timeless place. Here, life moves in cycles. Here hope endures, and the spirit of the city breathes steady and deep. The salty breeze carries the laughter of children, playing near the docks, mingled with the creak of ropes and the distant call of seagulls soaring high above as the sun begins. Its climb the harbor transforms into a place of departure and return, where journeys begin and end, and stories are woven like nets full of promise. In the Agra, the heart of the city, the citizens gather to exchange news, goods, and stories. The air alive with debate and laughter, with the clinking of cups filled with wine rich and deep, like the soil from which the vines grew. Here ideas are born. Here futures are imagined, where the old wisdom of the poets mingles with the restless energy of youth eager to carve their place in the unfolding story of the city and the world beyond, and spices and wood smoke rising to mingle with the stars, the city once more wrapped in a cloak of mystery and promise, of dreams chased and caught, and sometimes slipped away, reminding all who listen that beneath the surface of daily life lies a deeper current, a story that connects each soul to the ancient song of existence. Conversations ripple like gentle waves, touching all who listen, the sound of voices weaving tapestries of thought, belief, but in the breath of the wind, the warmth of the sun, the cool touch of marble beneath your fingers, and in the beating of your own heart that joins with all those who have loved, lost, hoped, and dreamed beneath these skies. Meanwhile, the artisans in their workshops shape the raw earth in metal and fabric into forms that speak of beauty and purpose, a sculptor's hands coaxing life from stone, a weaver's fingers tracing patterns that echo the stars, a potter shaping vessels to hold water, wine, or oil, each creation a testament to the enduring human desire to create, to express, and to leave a mark beyond the fleeting moments of breath and heartbeat. The smell of wet clay and the ringing of hammers blend with the soft hum of concentration, and the occasional shared smile, a quiet celebration of craft and passion that connects the maker to the past and the future through the magic of form and function. Their rustling sounds like secrets shared only with those who pause long enough to listen, whispers carried from one generation to the next, stories told not in words, but in the language of leaves and shadows and starlight. They are silent witnesses to the endless passing of days and seasons, guardians of stories, both joyous and sorrowful, etched not only in marble and stone, but in the very spirit of the place. Their light is a gentle pulse in the darkness, a beacon of hope for wandering souls seeking refuge, solace, or answers beneath the vast cosmos that has witnessed the comings and goings of countless lives and the eternal cycle of death and rebirth. The prayers offered here rise like smoke, curling upward to mingle with the stars, carrying the wishes and gratitude of mortals to the ears of gods who listen beyond the veil. Their hopes, fears, and longings intertwine across the ages, weaving an invisible tapestry that holds the city in its embrace, like a mother cradling a child safe and warm beneath her gentle arms. It is a fabric spun from the threads of countless lives' stories, layered upon stories, memories etched in stone and heart, like a living legacy that transcends time and space, connecting all who call this place home. Their eyes may be blind to the present, yet their presence holds the ancient wisdom of ages long gone, their silent gazes, bridging the ephemeral now and the eternal, then offering solace to those who seek meaning. Beneath the ever-turning skies, the lamps flicker and fade, the stars retreat, one by one, as the breath of morning fills the air with the scent of earth and sea and the promise of new beginnings. Each day is a gift, another chance to walk the paths of gods and heroes, to add new stories to the ever-growing tapestry of human experience. Feel the quiet power of stories told and retold through endless generations, and know that in this sacred, timeless place, you are always home. The journey that has brought you here has reached its gentle close, but the story continues unfolding in every heartbeat, every whispered prayer, every step taken along the paths of earth and sky. The divine and the mortal meet in this sacred pause, a fleeting glimpse beyond the veil where the eternal touches the temporal and the unseen becomes almost visible. But carried in the breath of the wind, the warmth of the sun, the cool touch of marble beneath your fingers, and in the beating of your own heart. That heartbeat joins the rhythm of all who have loved, lost, hoped, and dreamed beneath these skies, from the earliest days of myth to the unfolding moment you inhabit now. The stories you have heard, the images you have imagined, are not merely echoes of a distant past, but living threads woven into the fabric of today and tomorrow. They are the breath of Olympus, the song of the earth, the pulse of human spirit, ever enduring, ever changing, ever becoming. A lullaby carried on the breath of the earth, a timeless reminder of the deep connection that binds all living things across the vast tapestry of existence beyond what the eyes can see or the hands can touch, and settle softly upon the silent rooftops, the worn ancient stones, and the olive groves that sway in the cool evening breeze. The city breathes in quiet rhythms, its heartbeat steady and sure beneath the stillness, as if listening to a song sung by time itself, a lullaby woven from the whispers of the past and the hopes of the present. As the sun reaches its zenith, the city slows again in the quiet hours when shadows grow long and the heat presses heavy, a time for rest, for reflection, for the simple acts of eating and sleeping and dreaming. Beneath the watchful eyes of statues that have seen countless suns rise and fall, their faces worn, yet proud, silent sentinels guarding the stories of all who have come before. The marble cool beneath fingertips, the weight of history pressing gently on the soul. A moment of stillness amid the vibrant life. A sacred pause where time seems to fold inward like petals closing at dusk, holding within it the mysteries of all that has been and all that might yet be. And in the gardens where olive trees stand like ancient guardians, the soft murmur of leaves is a lullaby to the soul, a reminder of resilience. The twisted trunks bear witness to countless seasons, their roots deep in the earth, their branches reaching skyward as if to touch the divine, the air thick with the scent of earth and growing things a sanctuary, where the soul can find respite from the noise and haste beyond. As evening falls again, the lamps are lit, their flames flickering gently in the cooling air, casting dancing shadows on walls, alive with the textures of history, the scent of herbs. The streets take on a softer hue, the golden glow mingling with the cool blue of twilight as the city exhales. The distant sound of music drifts on the breeze, mingling with the murmur of voices, sharing stories old and new, a tapestry of human experience woven beneath the vast canvas of the night sky. The voices of poets and singers rise on the night air, telling tales of gods and heroes, of love lost and found, of battles fought on fields and in hearts. Their words swirl like incense, weaving through the streets and homes, touching hearts and minds, awakening memories of places and times where myth and reality were one. And the dance of life was a sacred ritual. In this dance of light and shadow, of noise and silence, of joy and sorrow, the city lives and breathes. The eternal rhythm of human spirit, ever seeking, ever yearning, ever becoming a place where myth and reality entwine, and where every stone and every whisper carries the pulse of 1,000 lifetimes. So as you walk through these streets in your mind, as you listen to the echoes of a world that never truly sleeps, know that you are part of this endless story, a story told not just in words. And as night returns once more to cloak the city in its gentle embrace, the cycle begins anew, the dance continues, and the enduring spirit of this place whispers softly to all who will listen, inviting you to become both witness and participant in the timeless tale of life and myth, interwoven forever beneath the ever-watchful gaze of Olympus. The night deepens, slowly folding the world beneath a vast velvet cloak studded with countless stars, whose gentle light has journeyed across endless ages to arrive now. In this serene hour, the wind moves softly through the branches of olive trees, their leaves shimmering silver in the moonlight. As they sway in gentle conversation with the night, the statues scattered throughout the city stand like patient sentinels, their faces softened and worn by the caress of centuries, their forms frozen in moments of grace and power. Far from the bustling streets and the quiet sanctuaries, the temples cradle flickering candles, whose flames dance with soft warmth, casting moving shadows that stretch and shrink in harmony with the night air. In this stillness, the gods themselves seem near, not in the roar of thunder or the blaze of fire, but as a subtle presence felt in the cool caress of evening air, the faint rustle of fabric on stone, the distant echo of a hymn sung long ago, yet still alive in memory, and in the silent spaces between moments where time seems to fold inward and breath becomes a prayer whispered on the wind. The dreams of those who sleep within these ancient walls mingle with the dreams of those who have walked here in times long past. As the first pale hints of dawn begin to blush upon the distant horizon, the city stirs slowly, ready to awaken from its quiet reverie, to step once again into the endless dance of light and shadow, life and myth that has shaped its very soul since time, beyond memory. Know that as you listen now, you are part of this timeless journey, a journey not bound by the limits of place or time. So rest now beneath this vast sky of stars, wrapped in the gentle embrace of myth and memory, carried on the soft winds that whisper through olive groves and ancient stones. And so with calm breath and open heart, you drift gently into sleep, carried on the wings of ancient songs, cradled by the enduring spirit of a world where gods and mortals walk together, where myth and life dance endlessly beneath the ever-watchful eyes of Olympus. Good night, and may your dreams be filled with the light of stars and the whispers of timeless tales.